All right, what is going on? It's drive time on a Thursday afternoon, about 6 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. Merry post-Christmas to you. Hope you had a great holiday yesterday. Hope you had a great time with friends and family, maybe getting some time off of work, or if you did not and you stayed on the grind, shout out to you. But it is Christmas week, and we are back live on air for the first time since Monday. Had a best of show on Tuesday. We were off yesterday for Christmas, and now back today and tomorrow to close out Christmas week. So great to have you along for the ride, as it is every single day. Spence Checketts behind the mic. Olivia is filling in for Porter today, who is off once again for a couple of days. Porter will be back on Monday. So Olivia filling in, doing a great job today and tomorrow. We've got a lot to get to since you and I last spoke. A lot has happened. Christmas Day NFL action, not awesome. NBA Christmas Day action, very much awesome. LeBron James after the game looking into the camera and saying, I love the NFL, but Christmas is our day. And for one day it was. Now the NFL ratings dwarfs that of the NBA, so that will not change. But I thought it was a fun day for people to maybe be reintroduced to NBA basketball. If you've not been watching, a friend of the show, Chris Herring, wrote a piece for ESPN.com today outlining some of the great storylines that are happening in pro basketball. So we'll get to some of those on the program today. The Utah Jazz are in action tonight. It is a late tip. It's an 8 o'clock tip as they're up in the great Pacific Northwest to take on the Portland Trail Blazers. Both these teams are not very good at basketball this year. But I'm going to be nice to the Jazz. I was scolded by somebody who I respect who works over there who says I'm being too negative. I'm not trying to be negative. Nobody wants the Jazz to win more than I do. I can tell you that much. So we'll talk some Jazz basketball, some NBA basketball. We will get you ready for the final tilt of Week 16 in pro football, a little Thursday night action. And then we'll get to the Week 17 storylines. It should be a lot of fun. So, Seahawks-Bears tonight, Soldier Field. Seattle is a 5-point favorite on the road. And then we've just got a bevy of action coming up as pro football is really starting to get very interesting. A good Sunday slate coming up with a lot on the line, quite frankly. Did you enjoy the Netflix presentation? Our good friends, I should say, the Eagles father and son duo. Ian Eagle calling the morning game, and then Noah Eagle calling the afternoon game. Noah's going to hop on the show tomorrow. I want to see what his experience was like calling NFL football on Netflix. So we'll get to some storylines in that direction. There is some breaking news as Pat Riley's come out and said they're not going to trade Jimmy Butler. Now, we'll see if that changes because Jimmy Butler's the one name on the pro basketball trading block right now that, if moved, could certainly change the landscape of a team and maybe the landscape of the league. So the latest on the NBA trade deadline, every time a trade deadline primer or preview is released, whether it's a story that you read or somebody you listen to, the Jazz are mentioned. And will the Jazz be active prior to that trade deadline? We'll get to it. The latest on the transfer portal. I know what you guys want. Latest on the transfer portal for Utah football. Latest on the transfer portal for BYU football. Had a couple of interesting conversations while we were off. Shed a little light on just exactly how BYU was able to land A.J. DeBanza and where they're at kind of with their collective efforts and their NIL efforts and the people that have stepped up, the much-needed people that have stepped up in Provo. Is the same thing happening here in Salt Lake. We'll get to that on the show as far as the latest with both BYU and Utah. As college football, plenty of games left, including BYU Colorado. Should be a really fun one. Excited for that one. And then hopefully the second round, the quarterfinals of the CFP, look a little more exciting than the first round did. We got the Peach Bowl with Texas, Arizona State. We have the Rose Bowl with Ohio State and Oregon. Penn State, Boise State is the Fiesta Bowl. Then Notre Dame, Georgia is the Sugar Bowl. 8 teams left standing. And, of course, BYU and Colorado to play what, in my estimation, should be one of the most exciting non-CFP bowl games. Excited to see how BYU stacks up to Colorado, and excited to see how that game plays out. So a lot to get to on the program today. The Utah Hockey Club back in action tomorrow. They're off tonight. College basketball starting to get interesting. University of Utah men's hoops will get rolling with their Big 12 slate coming up next week against Baylor. So a ton going on today, and a good guest list, too. We're going to catch up with Jim Herman, who played college ball at BYU. And I was able to catch up with Jim and spend some time with him at Steve Young's charity golf tournament a couple months back. And Jim's been on the show before. So we're going to talk the latest with BYU and the latest with the college football current slate and the situation, NIL transfer portal and such. With Jim Herman, get his thoughts on Kalani Sitake's contract extension and the future of college football here in the state. The TV voice of the Utah Jazz, Craig Bolerjack, will stop by prior to him calling the game tonight with the Jazz and the Blazers. Then we'll visit with Gordon Monson. It's the Big Show, Big Hour. We do it here on The Drive every Thursday afternoon. We'll bring in Eric Weddle, former Ute, stops by today as well. And then Zach Harper, NBA Daily Assist style. So busy guest list. A lot of college football, a little NFL, and, of course, some NBA and some Utah Jazz on the show today. So Jim Herman, Craig Bolerjack, Gordon Monson, Eric Weddle, and Zach Harper. Jim's going to join us right out of the gates as our first guest. But before we get to Jim Herman, courtesy of our friends at Standard Restaurant Supply, it's your one-stop shop for all your tailgate needs on a Thursday afternoon. It's time now for your opening tip. So this time of year, when it comes to the college football, the current state of the game, current state of college football locally and nationally, it's kind of an interesting media cycle to consume, and certainly as part of this job to do the best I can to keep up with all of the pieces of news that come in fast and furious, and then listen to what other people have to say and try to understand exactly what's most interesting right now to college football fans. And it's odd, and maybe this would be different if Utah football was in, I don't know, even just a marginal bowl game, let alone the CFP. But it does seem like right now in college football, the most popular topics and the most popular content has to do with the transfer portal and what your team is going to look like next year. And look, there's plenty of time left. So ultimately, we're not dismissing or anointing any teams on the show today. You know, that would be silly to do because there are plenty of players that are in the portal that have not elected where they're going to play. And the most maddening part of all of this and the most idiotic dynamic of all of this right now is that college football finds itself in free agency during the season. It's beyond stupid, and that will change. And I'm convinced that's going to change even as quickly as next year, because anybody who's been asked about it, like, nobody has made the case for it. Nobody, and typically with the debate, with how many talking heads there are these days, not just radio and television, but podcasts and YouTube channels, there are a couple of dudes that will zig when everyone else zags. There are a couple of dudes that will try to take the contrarian viewpoint. Nobody has done that with this. It has been summarily dismissed, and it feels like it's a consensus of how stupid that it is that a sport has free agency while games are still being played. You save free agency for the offseason because, of course, you do. To be analogous, can you imagine in football or basketball when the biggest games are left? Because that's what's left in college football. The college football playoff is going on, and these players are getting called by agents to ask if they want to enter the transfer portal, because you have to do it if you want to sort of find out what hand you've been dealt and what your worth is on the open market, which I'm all for. If you listen to the show, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you know that I'm for that. I've been for that for a long time. Yes, college athletes should have always had the same basic economic rights that you and I have, okay? But now that we're in that reality, it really is time to frame it with some guardrails that just make it more sensible and easier to kind of traverse for mostly coaches, quite frankly, and yes, players too. But the players aren't necessarily the ones that are being stung by the new reality of college football. The players are the ones that are being taken care of because they can now make money. And like I said, they should have always been in this space. But there's a reason why in the pros, I can't believe I'm going to say it out loud. There's a reason why in the pros, free agency is during the offseason. It's like basic. It's the most basic thing we can possibly talk about. There's a reason why in the pros, they wait until the offseason to allow players to change teams via free agency. Now, you can make trades during the year, right? And ultimately, I always kind of scoff at the whole loyalty conversation with players who do leave via free agency. As fans, you get stung. You know, you're bummed when your 4th of July is ruined when Gordon Hayward decides he's going to Boston, and I get that. But if you work in an industry where essentially if your boss decides you're somewhat disposable, he can just trade you tomorrow and give you a call in the AM and say, hey, you live in Cleveland now. then you should have an avenue and the ability to decide where you do what you do and where you're going to play basketball. I've always found it interesting that these basketball players, these football players, these baseball players, soccer players, the best in the world at what they do, yet they are told where they have to do that. I'm not completely comfortable with it entirely. Now, there's a side non sequitur conversation about what it means for a city like Salt Lake to try to build a pro basketball franchise, and that's why the NBA does have guardrails in place to ensure that if you draft and develop a player, you at least have 7-8 years with them. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't guarantee anything beyond that, but that's when the conversation gets interesting, because should a free agent, I always go back to the Kevin Garnett thing. You know, Garnett gave Minnesota basically a decade, and they had a couple of good teams when they had Sam Cassell and Latrell Sprewell. They went to the Western Conference Finals, but they were never close to winning an NBA championship, and quite frankly, never that close to winning the West, even though they had a couple of decent teams. And so after a decade, I had no issue with Garnett looking around and saying, hey, I gave you 10 years, and I was one of the best players of this generation. I want to go win a championship. And Minnesota and Kevin McHale at the time did right by him by trading him to Boston. And their executive, Danny Ainge, built a championship team around Garnett and Paul Pierce and Ray Allen. And I had no problem with that. Now, if you're a Timberwolves fan, it sucks. And if you're a Jazz fan, you're watching Donovan Mitchell have a career year for a team in Cleveland that is just nasty. And Donovan didn't leave in free agency. He was traded. But if you followed that story, Donovan had one foot out the door basically the entire final year he was here, leaving a lot of fans to feel betrayed. So there isn't a perfect solution that will make everybody happy, but there has to be guardrails in place for college football that at least allow coaches, who really are the ones against the coaches and the fans are the ones that currently are losing out as a result of the new format and model of collegiate athletics. It's not the players, it's administrators, coaches, and fans. But in order for these coaches to have a fair shot at putting a good product on the field, free agency can't be while you're still playing games, okay? Because from a coaching perspective, you're running practice, okay? You're Kalani Sitake, you're running practice down in Provo. You're getting ready for what should be a really fun bowl game against Colorado, a game that will bring a lot of eyes because Deion does that. In the Alamo Bowl, 7:30, by the way, ABC. And ironically enough, you can hear the BYU game on our radio station, so stay tuned for that. But Deion brings a lot of eyes. BYU is a big brand. There will be, I don't know, I would guess 4, 5, 6 million people watching that game. BYU getting like a $6 million payout. This is a good bowl game. And BYU's earned it because of their 10-win season. But if you're Kalani, if you're Jay Hill, if you're A-Rod, if you're that coaching staff, you're running practice to prepare for Colorado. And then you say goodnight after practice is done, and then you have to wonder whether or not any of your players are going to be entering the transfer portal because BYU, I think at last check, has 6 guys that have entered the transfer portal. It makes it really hard to prepare for a game. And after all, the games are what all of this should be about. You know, and that's why I kind of started the segment off with some interesting, I don't know, observations from my standpoint that the most popular topic for college football fans right now, it does seem to be the transfer portal as opposed to the games. Now, first round of the CFP, not awesome. And we'll get to the latest with the University of Utah. You know, it was tough right before we said goodnight on Monday afternoon. It was announced that Keanu Tanavasa was in the transfer portal. That one stings. So does Cameron Calhoun. Keanu, unless I missed it, because I am not one who lives online. I don't record TikTok videos or combing Twitter for information. If he announced something, I just haven't seen it. And so that, of course, continues to open up the possibility that maybe Tanavasa lands back here. And that should be your hope because, man, he's good. A lot of these players, all due respect, from Utah that have entered the transfer portal, Dijon Stanley, for instance, nice kid, had an insanely good game right out of the gates to start the year off for the University of Utah, but never really broke into the rotation. And outside of catching a couple of swing passes that you or I probably could have caught, didn't do much. So, you wish Dijon well and you sent him on his way. Same thing with like Damian Alford or even Brandon Rose. Isaac Wilson has elected to come back, so that's good. But a lot of the players, you just kind of say, all right, best of luck. Congrats on whatever you were able to get in the open market. But Tanavasa and Calhoun, those two specifically, they hurt. They do. And, it's not just Utah. Of course, it's every program across the landscape of the state, every program across the landscape of college football that ultimately are trying to figure out how to traverse this. I mean, the latest BYU list as far as, and I have this up, this is current as of an hour ago. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have 14 BYU players in the transfer portal. BYU has locked in 5 players from the transfer portal. And of course, plenty is left to analyze here. But that's a good portion of your roster that you're trying to utilize at your disposal to prepare for games. And it's almost just unfair. It's almost impossible. And some of these programs will be rebuilding every year. In pro sports, you run into a rebuild situation. And by the way, it's no matter where you are. It's New York. The Knicks felt like they were rebuilding for 20 years. Nobody talks about the Nick Van Exel, Eldon Campbell Laker years, but the Lakers were rebuilding for years. The Heat were horrible for a long time before they kind of got things figured out. In pro sports, depending on your circumstances, depending on your front office, your ownership, how savvy you've been in roster construction, you're going to run into a rebuild every 7, 8, 9 years. And hopefully you don't run into a rebuild that takes very long, and that's what the Jazz have been really good at, historically speaking, present day excluded because the jury is very much still out. But you hope you can get it turned around within a couple of years, and then you have another generation of at least competitive basketball or football, and most good front offices are able to do that. See Oklahoma City. But the reality for a lot of teams in college football, if the guardrails are not added and the rules are not executed, there are going to be a lot of college football programs that will be rebuilding every year. That's not sustainable. You'll have plenty of smart college football coaches and administrators choosing to do something else with their lives because this is impossible. And it's too bad because it really is such a great product and such a great sport. And the fact that the ratings have not taken a hit, attendance has a little bit, and the secondary market for the first round of the CFP, there were Penn State, Oregon tickets that you could find in the secondary market for $10. For $10 for those two teams that are playing for a national championship. So there are some situations, ancillary situations that have been adversely affected, but not a ton. And the reason is the sport is awesome and the product is great and it's really fun to watch. It's really fun to consume. And that's why even though the current situation is untenable, and I believe that it is, we still sit down and watch. So can you imagine what this product will look like when all of the ducks are actually in a row? And when will that happen? Hopefully it's sooner rather than later. Hopefully we don't have to wait 4 or 5 years. And hopefully when the dust settles and there is a new reality where college football looks very much like pro football, both Utah and BYU get that invite. Because that's the crew to be in. And if Utah and BYU, before we catch a break, okay, so if this pro model comes to fruition and there are 40 teams that are in, sitting at the right lunch table, that are in this new college football reality that very much looks like pro football. Is it the ACC is it the SEC versus the Big Ten? Do they come up with new names? Just for reference, think AFC, NFC. It's going to look like a lot like the NFL. And if Utah and BYU get invites to join this group, it will be the closest thing, quite frankly, that we'll ever probably have to pro football in our market. But it will be a lot like the NFL model. And it will eliminate a lot of the FCS, FBS games, a lot of the big dogs taking on the little dudes that most people don't watch week in and week out. It will be blue bloods playing blue bloods almost every single week and brands playing brands every single week, and that'll be really exciting. In the meantime, there's just a lot to figure out for these people that are in charge of this great sport that we all love. We're going to bring in Jim Herman coming up next, continue the conversation about the current landscape of college football. Bowler will stop by, so will Gordon Monson, Eric Weddle, and Zach Harper. Busy Thursday show. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. We got Pittsburgh and Toledo going on right now. The game above Sports bowl season. BYU is going to take on Colorado coming up on Saturday. Should be one of the best non-CFP bowl games. That's going to be a 5:30 kick time on ABC in the Alamo Bowl. Right now, Colorado is a 4-point favorite. Excited to catch up with our next guest. He joined the show a few times back in the day when I was doing it with Gordo. He is a legend, played at Brigham Young, played a little NFL football. Great to have Jim Herman on the drive on a Thursday. Jim, Merry Christmas season. How are you, sir?
Merry Christmas to you, Spence. Thank you. Yeah, good for having me. Good. Things are good. Got through Christmas, survived, and enjoying it, and excited for the new year. I can't believe it's 2025 already.
I know, man. I know. What does Christmas look like in the Herman household?
Man, it's great. I got 3 boys. They're all married. Hard to believe, I actually have grandkids, as crazy as that is.
Oh, wow.
So I get to see them. I got a couple kids living in L.A. right now, building a business, and everyone's home, and so we're having a great time. Family and fun and all sorts of great things. I grew up in Wisconsin, so I actually have some Wisconsin family that owns a place up in Deer Valley, and they're coming out. My mother-in-law's coming, so yeah, good things.
Very nice. Great to hear. Great to hear. So I started the show off today, Jim, with just what I perceive to be a broken sport, albeit a great product in college football. And, you know, it's insane to me that essentially what we're dealing with is free agency during the year, right? So you have coaches that are trying to coach their team up for bowl games or CFP games to try to win national championships. And then after practice, they've got to run collateral damage to make sure their players aren't being contacted by agents. And so many teams that are still playing, including Brigham Young, have several players that are in the portal while the season is still going on. What are your thoughts on this dynamic specifically? The college football essentially has free agency while games are being played.
It's crazy. I agree with you, Spencer. I actually think it's worse than free agency because free agency has some rules and some guardrails, and there's actually seems to be a method to the madness, certainly at the NFL level. People change teams at that level. It's a job, and they're looking out for opportunities and places to go enhance their careers. Weirdly, that's trickled down to college football, but there just seems to be no rules for sport that I grew up in and was around for years. My brother played college football, obviously lots of friends of mine. And, you know, as long as I can remember until the real not too distant future was the strict guidelines of the NCAA. My gosh, you couldn't get an ice cream cone. You couldn't even think about transferring unless you sat out a year, and there were all these rules and restrictions, and now it just seems to be a total free-for-all, which I don't really understand. I don't know why someone hasn't stepped in. There used to seem to be a governing body that would try to curtail some of these things, but now it just seems to every year the rules change, maybe there's the Wizard of Oz out there that's making it all work in some chaotic form or fashion. But I'm with you. It seems to absolutely be crazy. I mean, Crew Wakely, who I think is one of BYU's best defensive backs, is in the portal, not going to play in the game. That hurts against an unbelievable Colorado team that throws the ball and has crazy skilled positions and is really apt at testing defensive backfields all around the country. And now BYU is at a disadvantage. And weirdly, it seems Colorado's kind of kept it all together. I'm not as informed as to the comings and goings over there on their team, but from the macro landscape of college football, it seems to be a mess. And I keep hoping. I really defer to, certainly I'm influenced by the NFL model. One, because I think it works. I grew up in a state where the Green Bay Packers are in a tiny little town smaller than Logan, Utah, and they fill a stadium of 90,000 people. And the only way that can survive is because there's central leadership with a game plan to make sure that all the teams within the league play by the same rules and have the opportunity to compete, whether you're in a big market, small market, big school, small school. And they've done a really good job of putting what I think is a framework that, based on where college football is going, could work at the college football level. But until there's central leadership in college football, getting back to the free agency question, I don't know how I don't know how it changes because the Big 12 cares about the Big 12, the Pac-10, or I'm sorry, the SEC cares about the SEC, the Big 10 cares about the Big 10, and someone's supposed to be caring about college football as a whole, and I don't know who that is because it just seems to be running crazy wild.
I wonder what your thoughts are, Jim, on what could be next, because I wholeheartedly agree, and I've talked on the show a lot about rip the Band-Aid off and just use the pro model, okay? Allow the players to unionize, collectively bargain with the people in charge, and that way, I'm not saying they sign 4 or 5 year contracts, but sign contracts that you're going to be with the program for a couple of years, maybe with an option after that. And that way you don't have to rebuild your program every single year if you have a player for 2 or 3 years or something like it. It seems like coaches are for it. It seems like players would be for it because then the contracts could be legal and above board. With right now, there's no regulation. If you want to pay a quarterback $1 billion to play at BYU, you can pay him $1 billion. So move to the pro model. I know there will be unfortunate collateral damage of athletic departments that don't have the same amount of revenue because football is the cash cow. But I also believe, Jim, at some point, and you exist in some of these spaces right now as well, private equity guys are going to get involved here, and they're going to start buying college football teams, buying stakes in college football teams, infusing the programs with money up front, with the promise that their investment will pay incredible dividends once this pro model becomes a reality. But in your opinion, you're a smart guy. What do you think is standing in the way now of college football just getting this done? Because I believe it would solve the majority of the issues that face the sport right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Spence. I mean, you and I are fully aligned. What I think standing in place is, just to echo what I said, is central leadership. I love or hate Roger Goodell. He represents the owners, right? And I was a union member when I was in the NFL. I paid my union dues. We had representatives. We talked. We met. We discussed issues that were relevant to us as players, and we relied on our representatives to be union, to speak for us as a union voice to the owners when they got together and collectively bargained. I was injured right before the strike year, way back in 87, 88. So I played 85, 86, then got injured. Then there was a strike year, and then I actually got a couple surgeries, and then actually signed after the second collective bargaining agreement with the LA Raiders. And so I saw it, and I live it now. We started an NFL alumni chapter here, and it's amazing what's changed and what's transpired for ex-players, but certainly from a current player standpoint and someone who's in the league, there's rules, there's representation, there's a plan, but it only comes with central leadership, in my opinion. I just don't. As of right now, the SEC is so powerful, and the Big Ten's not far behind, or vice versa. I'm not actually sure who generates more on a per team basis, but weirdly, as a conference, they kind of collectively bargain. The way I understand it, the Big Ten goes out and negotiates rights, media rights, and creates content, and that content's distributed, and they're paid by the distributors of the content. And then that is equally divided amongst the schools in the Big Ten and the SEC. So they're doing it on a conference basis, but people need to understand, and I wasn't a member of the Pac-12 or part of a school that was a member of the Pac-12, but this is the nation's favorite sport. It spans from coast to coast. And I think it's a travesty what happened on the to the Pac-12 and on the West Coast, but someone needs to look out for that. There should not be two teams in LA that get on a plane on a weekly basis and fly to Maryland or Happy Valley, Pennsylvania to participate. And it sounds great for football because you're on a chartered flight, but there's some volleyball player, female volleyball player, who's a scholar athlete who has to take a psych test on Thursday, and she traveled to Rutgers on Tuesday, and she took the red eye back with 3 connections on the way back to UCLA, studied, took her test on Thursday, and then got on a plane and flew to Minnesota. Like it's just nuts. And until someone gets their act together and figures out that college football specifically, and I think maybe college football needs to be its own thing, not own thing in the sense that it's not a a sport tied to college, college and universities, but it might need to be its own revenue model and have its own representation, both from an ownership standpoint, all of the universities and or private equity who has the opportunity to buy into some of these programs and then collectively bargain for the players, because it definitely is the goose that's laying the golden egg, and it helps fund lots of other sports. And until this is all figured out, sadly, what has made college football so great in America is just starting to disintegrate before our very own eyes. We certainly love it. I'm tuning in. I'm watching it, but it's hard as a fan. It's hard as a fan to feel something strongly about a team that there was a young man who represented your school, and next year he's going to represent another school, and next year he's going to represent another school, which, by the way, I thought you could only transfer once, and it seems guys now are transferring 2, 3, 4 times. It just is absolutely crazy. But to answer your question specifically, I think what's standing in its way is we need a Roger Goodell of college football to represent, I guess, really the media or the universities collectively, and then we need to figure out a way to make sure the athletes are represented. And I don't know if it has to be at quite the level that the NFL is, and maybe I'm being naive on that, but players, look, there's lots of coaches and universities making tons of money, and certainly it was a matter of time before some of those resources need to be directed to players, because some of them are maimed for life. Some of them get great educations and they move on, and it was an unbelievable experience. And some of them are generating huge amounts of revenue for schools and coaches that are making millions and millions of dollars. So to get those guys a share of the pot, I don't think is necessarily a negative thing, but it's just now seems to be the wild, wild west with a system with no rules.
I wonder, and let's just one more thing here, then we can move on, because I want to ask you about the bowl game and Kalani and all that good stuff. But let's talk through this real quick to see if there's anything there, because I do think a game changer will be private equity money, venture capitalists coming in to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the sport. Is there a way that you could get enough, private equity venture capitalists in a room that all want to invest in this? And then because of the money, they're willing to really give up front to programs and then say, you can use this with NIL, you can use this to upgrade facilities or pay your or whatever. And these guys, you're in the space. The one thing that they will not do is invest the money unless they think they can get great dividends on the back end.
Exactly.
Right? So if they're willing to step up and write these big checks, could they as a group garner enough power to pick a Roger Goodell of college football and say, this is the guy that's going to run this thing for us? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, certainly being in the space, for those of you who don't know, not that I work for a private equity firm. Actually, my partner's in the Hall of Fame in the NFL and in the Hall of Fame in college football, Steve Young. And our partner's in a private equity firm, Huntsman Gate Global Capital, HGGC, and we have lots of money under management. We have a thematic sourcing initiative within our firm to look for sports, athletic, sports centric businesses to invest in, right? It's something that is important to us as individuals and as a firm. And so we're trying to find ways to put money to work in professional athletics. All that being said, the model in college athletics is unique. I'm with you. Kind of from a macro viewpoint, but how do you make that work when some of these teams are owned by states? They're owned by state institutions. They're owned by the University of Utah, takes a lot of state money. And I don't know what the ownership looks like in the University of Utah, how that was set up, what the charter was when the University of Utah was established. And I don't know what hurdles that impose on private equity, right? I mean, like you said, private equity is what it says it is. It's taking private dollars, investing it in an asset, figuring out a way to create value in that asset and get a return for the shareholders. And that, to me, I think is going to be complicated based on the landscape of college football. But conceptually, what you're saying, do I agree with? Absolutely. And I'm not sure, I don't know if it's private equity. I hate to say it. I'm a capitalist. I believe in the free enterprise and free market system. I believe less government's better. I do think potentially one way to get control of this crazy monster is to have the federal government step in one way, shape, or form or the other and enact laws, because some of these schools, like I said, these schools are federally owned, state owned. Some of them are 100 years old, 150, 200 years old institutions that I'm not sure they would be willing to take private equity money, although they take lots of private equity money and to fund endowments. I don't know if they're going to take private equity money to give up ownership in an asset that some 200-year-old educational institution owns. So I don't know, Spence. I don't know how to divvy it up, but I do think what you're saying resonates, and it has to happen. And whether it's I saw Dion on a clip the other day on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or somewhere on a reel. I saw Nick Saban. Everyone's saying the same thing. Chip Kelly said the same thing, right? It's like, look, guys, we're generating a lot of money. Let's figure out how much money goes to the school. Let's figure out how much money goes to the players. Let's divvy that up. Let's have some guardrails. This money, and I'm a believer that, Green Bay gets the same amount of Dallas, and Dallas gets the same amount as the New York Giants, and the New York Giants get the same amount as the LA Rams, and that makes it work, right? Any given Sunday wasn't some crazy marketing, slogan. It was to create an even system. It was to create parity. And I think that's what we want in college football. We certainly want it regionally. I don't think anyone at Oregon State wakes up on a Saturday and says, wonder what's happening at Georgia Tech today. I sure hope they win, or I sure hope they lose, right? I mean, what's made college football so great are regional and conference rivalries that are part of this global, American landscape of college football. I mean, it's kind of all part of this giant quilt, but there's patches that are more relevant to certain people. And Oregon State cares about Oregon and Washington and Cal down the road. At least they used to. And Michigan is always going to care about Ohio State. No, Ohio State's always going to care about Michigan because they border each other. And BYU is always going to care about Utah, and Utah's always going to care about BYU. And the SEC schools are the same. And so let's figure out a way to get the University of Tennessee the same amount of money as Oregon State. And some people roll their eyes at that, but I think that's what makes it work. I mean, right now, the Big Ten schools, they all make the same. No one seems to roll their eyes at Rutgers, who is not great at anything, is getting the same cash payout that Ohio State's getting, right? I mean, they make that work because they all need each other. They need each other in that conference. And it's the same with the SEC. Vanderbilt has been getting their share, the same share that Alabama and Georgia's been getting in the SEC since they've been divvying up those those funds from media rights. And so I just don't understand why we can't do that on a global landscape. And maybe it shrinks. Maybe it's, instead of 130 teams or 135 teams or whatever it is, maybe there's a group of 5 and there's a different group. And whether that's 80 or 90 or 60 or 100, I don't know what the number is. But right now there's a lot of money generated for the schools in the Big Ten. There's a lot of money generated for the schools in the SEC. There's a lot of money generated for the schools in the Big 12, and there used to be a lot of money generated for the Pac-12. And the Pac-12 just had horrible leadership, and people lost their minds, and they said, look, for an extra $10 million, I'm willing to forego our unbelievable history as a conference, and I'm going to join a conference that means nothing to us, and then we have to travel all across the country for a few extra dollars. So why not find a way to make the pie bigger? And that's what the NFL has done. Everyone gets their slice, and they're unified. They want to put the best product forward. I mean, there's a great Acquired podcast, if you're a podcaster, Spence, about how they did it and why they did it. And it was entertainment, and it was a way to create a product, and the product was the NFL. And our product is college football, and people love it. And let's not kill it. And we're freaking killing it because we don't have someone driving the bus, and it just bums me out.
A lot of good stuff there. It feels like you guys need to get involved because I know life is really good for Steve, but you could do worse as far as a college football commissioner than Steve Young, yeah?
Yeah, life is good for Steve, and Steve is very smart. I'm certainly biased, but I mean, I studied my A off for the LSAT and got 84%, and I don't think he studied once, and he was in the 99%. He's a smart guy. He's connected. He's he's respected, and he sees he sees what the opportunity is, and he's competed at the highest level of both. And maybe it's him, and maybe it's a panel. Maybe it's him and Nick Saban and a few other players. I mean, people that have been around and experienced what they needed to experience to understand how to protect a really strong American asset that a lot of people that live in this country care about. And before we goes too far down the path, we get it back and headed in the right direction. And I'm hopeful that's going to happen. I mean, I just hear Nick Saban now on game day, and he's a voice. He's got a platform now, and he talks about it. And social media, if anything, has created a platform and an opportunity for people to share their opinions. And most of the people that I see share their opinions kind of are saying the same thing you're saying, Spence. They want to fix this before it gets too late.
Let's move over now to what's going on at your alma mater. And, as soon as the NIL, as soon as it became a reality, when the NCAA was basically thrown out of court and told that you're a serial antitrust violator, get out of my courtroom and go figure it out. And suddenly the landscape started to shift. On the show, I said that day, this feels like it could be really good news for BYU. At the time, independents, they were kind of looking for a home. Then the Big 12 invite happens. And, Kalani, year 2 in the Big 12, wins 10 games and nearly wins the whole thing. And, down at Steve's golf tournament, I caught up with Brian Santiago. We talked about all of the really cool initiatives they have in place. And right now it feels like BYU's collective, or whatever they're calling it, is in a really healthy spot in a way that Utah's isn't as of now. They lock in A.J. DeBanza. And, Jim, I don't know if you've seen this kid play. My goodness, he is for real. So it feels like BYU right now with their collective and their NIL initiatives have figured some things out, and it's going in the right direction. Can you shed some light on the mechanisms about how they've been able to kind of make this work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear your perspective, and I totally agree. One is I think BYU's figured a bunch of things out. Right? One is, it's good to be liked, and it's good to like other people. And I think BYU's figured out that, look, I went to BYU as a non-member kid from Wisconsin. I didn't know any LDS people back where I grew up. I had never heard of BYU. I went there, had an unbelievable experience. I was part of a fraternity that was pretty diverse. And so, it wasn't, I mean, it was still part of the greater BYU community, which actually I embraced and figured out this is going to be really cool. It's something I don't know about. And I'm willing to learn, and I'm excited to kind of, expand my horizons and be part of a community that I didn't grow up in. And I think BYU is doing the same thing kind of on a broader landscape, which is college athletics, right? They're looking to bring people in from other universities and other places. I mean, my goodness, they have their starting quarterback's a Jewish young man who's embraced being a Jew at BYU and what that means, all the positives around that whole scenario. And I think I have not had a chance to see AJ, but my goodness, I just hear unbelievable things. I have a lot of friends certainly involved at BYU and the basketball community, both collegiately and otherwise, that just tell me this kid is just unbelievable. And I think this is where NIL really paid off. And I'm not talking about BYU NIL, because the way I understand it, and I could be mistaken, but I've got some pretty deep sources, and I got kind of some pretty good information, is he was going to get a vast majority of the money that everyone sees, that dollar figure, whether it's 7 million or 8 million or 6.5 or 8.5 or whatever the number is. The vast majority of that is coming from true NIL, right? Which is what it was supposed to be, right? A big chunk's coming from Nike. And, oh, by the way, when he was on ESPN and he made the announcement, he had a little Red Bull logo on the side of his BYU hat. A big chunk is coming from Red Bull. Now he's got a big wad of money in his pocket, right? And so now he's going to go get a chunk of money from other schools, whether it be Kentucky or Duke or Kansas or BYU, and he got a chunk of money from BYU. But that chunk of money from BYU, I don't think necessarily carried the day. It just made it competitive, right? They didn't have to write that whole number. They could write a percentage of that number coupled with true NIL money. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to make the same money here if I make it at Kansas. I'm not going to make a whole lot more there. I'm not going to make a whole lot more at North Carolina. And, oh, by the way, I went to high school here. And my parents really like the environment at BYU, and I've made some friends in the community in Utah, and I liked their coaching staff. And so it gave BYU a chance. And I think that's where NIL can be it can level the playing field to a certain extent. And it's not really just outbidding someone. Like BYU didn't go and outbid other people. They just were competitive. And they offered things that were important to him and his family. So I think that's the positive side of it. And you're right. When they said, and I hate to even say NIL because, look, there's a professional sports team here that you know very well, the Utah Jazz. And I don't know about you, I don't see a ton of Utah Jazz guys getting NIL money in the local market. And usually they're the non-starters. They're the guys that are doing the used car dealership for Larry Miller so they get the use of a car and they get an extra $50K, or they're on a credit union commercial. But people that are in the business world, like myself and other people, you need an ROI on those dollars. And people just aren't scratching checks to both collegiate players or NBA players in a market unless somehow they feel it's going to make their business thrive and there's going to be a return on that dollar investment. And Nike certainly can do that, right? They're betting on this kid being the next Michael Jordan, or the likes thereof, right? And Red Bull is you're wanting to affiliate with this guy because he's just an unbelievable talent. And then you've got a university that can throw in some dollars to say, hey, and by the way, we really like you too, and we want you to come, and we use some NIL dollars, and we have a collective. I shouldn't say NIL. I get a little miffed sometimes when people throw NIL around, and it's really not NIL. It's just pay to play. But we've got a pool of funds that we can pay you to come play for us, and it's all going to work out. And kudos to BYU because I think, obviously the ownership of BYU is unique, and they care about what people think about that institution and them as a culture. And I think they said, you know what? Hey, look, we can do a lot of good by being competitive on the field. And yes, we're willing to back this to a certain extent. I think if it gets crazy, you might feel that change. But right now they're like saying, yeah, let's go along. Let's be really mindful. They hired a GM, which, basically is a lawyer to come make sure they're doing everything, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and doing everything by the book. And it seems to be working. So I'm grateful that, my school that I went to school and played at with, by the way, Kyle Whittingham was my teammate. So I get the same thing at BYU, and I'm friends with Kyle and I'm friends with Freddie. And I talk to those guys about these same issues, and, they're important to their program, just like it's important to BYU and it's important to them as fans of the sport. So I don't know if I answered the question, but yes, it's crazy what's happening down there, and I think it's really good. I think the portal has been a real benefit for them. They're just in this last week, a couple of kids that I've coached in high school that, I coached Cecilia Kana, who was a top 40 recruit in the country. I mean, he had 100 offers. Then he went to Texas, and some good, some not ideal, and thought it might be good to come closer to where he went. Grew up and from a high school standpoint, and came back here and made the rounds, and he's going to go to BYU. I'm thrilled because I coached him in high school, and now I get to see him play in person. He's an awesome human being, and he's a phenomenal talent. And so I see some of those things kind of work out in our favor, just like it's working out at Utah. It's sad to see some guys go, but it's also exciting to get some talent. But it can't be a revolving door. It's like, my goodness, come and play for us. And like you said earlier, if you're going to sign a contract means something. Usually has a term. It's usually not, 3 months. It's usually a year or 2 years, or there's going to be something that triggers another opportunity for you to leave. But if you're going to take cash and you're going to come play for my school, I'm going to say you're going to play in all the games, including the bowl game. And that's where I give Dion a ton of credit. And you're going to stick around because we're going to come up with some resources, and that's, quid pro quo. You play for us, you get cash, and it's got to be some sort of commitment. So yeah, all those things, Spence, you and I could talk about for hours because I'm passionate about it, and it sounds like you care as well. And so yeah, it's interesting.
Great stuff, Jim. I appreciate your time today. I knew it would be good, and I'm glad you had a great Christmas. I'll wish you a happy New Year's, and love to have you on again at some point. Okay.
I appreciate it. Hey, come to our next golf tournament. It was great to see you.
For sure.
Next time
For
we're
sure.
Gonna be the same foursome.
No, I'd love to, Jim. Thank you, sir. Okay.
Thank you, Spence. Appreciate you.
All right. Jim Herman played college ball at BYU, was the captain of that 1984 national championship game, played in the NFL for Dallas and Cincinnati, and now working with Steve Young over in the venture capitalist space, private equity money. Good dude, sharp guy. Thought he would have good perspective on the current landscape of college football, which he did. So if you missed that, it'll be up on the website of the podcast page momentarily. All right, we'll shift gears. Craig Bolerjack joins us coming up next, the TV voice of the Utah Jazz on a Thursday drive. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. Got the Seahawks and the Bears. Seahawks and the Bears tonight, Thursday Night Football. Right after we say goodnight, it'll wrap up the Week 17 slate. Hard to believe that we're almost done now with the NFL. Great stuff from Jim Herman today, former BYU Cougar, former NFL player for a number of years, and now doing some work with Steve Young in the venture capitalist private equity space. So appreciate his time today. We are efforting Craig Bolerjack, the TV voice of the Utah Jazz. Jazz are in action tonight. They're taking on the Portland Trailblazers. And so we'll get to some Jazz stuff here. They've been better as of late. My fear is that they're going to accidentally win 25 or 30 games and draft 8th or 9th again, which will just put this thing in a perpetual rebuild, which is, of course, what nobody wants. So we'll see how it plays out. But they have been better. So it's a late tip tonight. It's 8 o'clock because they're up in Portland. And let's bring him in now. The legend himself, the TV voice of the Utah Jazz on a Thursday afternoon, Craig Bolerjack. Bowler, happy post-Christmas, sir. How are you?
I'm good, Spence. Happy post-Christmas and happy almost New Year. How about that?
I love it. I love it. Were you able to spend the holidays with that great family of yours?
You know, I was. We
Good,
got
good.
in late. I love Christmas Eve. I enjoyed that. Had a little Christmas morning, and then on a plane, and we got up here last night around 6:30. So, a quick turnaround. But that's the life in the NBA.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So before we get to tonight specifically, I think it's fair to say the play has been improved over the past little bit. Of course, wins always help. Back-to-back wins against a couple of teams that are kind of in the same spot, the Jazz are. And then they played the Cavs pretty tough. I know nobody gives a rip about that, but over the past, I'd say 3 games or so, Craig, it feels like they've been playing a little bit better. They're a little bit more competitive. What are you seeing from your seat?
Yeah, I think you see the younger players, and I'm talking about the second-year players and even the third-year player. And Mr. Walker Kessler seems to be a much more confident big in this league right now. Sensabaugh has had a moment or two. Juzang has had his moments as well. It's all about consistency, Spence. You and I have talked a lot about that with Gordo. And, that's probably the biggest issue that Will faces every night is, can you be consistent? Can you play and allow your miscues to 2 minutes instead of 6, right? And I thought against even Cleveland, the best team in the NBA, look, they were full. They brought everybody. And, the Jazz, hit the 3-point shot, 19 of 44. Walker had a huge rebound game and, 5 players again in double figures. The vets have played a role, but I think also some of the younger guys are beginning to be, I hate to keep using the word, but connected, more cohesive. They understand who they are. They understand their teammates. The turnovers are still high, but yet not as suffocating. And at least they're more competitive. And I think that's what the Jazz are looking for right now is growth and be competitive. If you lose, that's part of the game plan, but still learn in the process. And hopefully that's what the Jazz are doing.
We've talked about the dynamic, Craig, and you know this as well, if not better than anybody. Oftentimes, for whatever reason, and the reasons vary, a lot of really good players for the Jazz end up going elsewhere and never fully recapturing what they were when they were here. The examples of Gordon Hayward, who, of course, got hurt, so that's different. And then D-Will, Darren himself, who has admitted he probably should have stuck around, but, he decided, and he was traded, but obviously he went elsewhere with the New Jersey Nets, not the Brooklyn Nets, and never fully recaptured who he was here, which was one of the best lead guards in pro basketball for like 4 years. But the Donovan stuff, I think, will always sting a little bit because he's still smack dab in the middle of his prime, and he's awesome. He just is. You've seen it up close for years. I don't know. Did you have a chance to say hello? How does it seem to be going? He's having the numbers are pretty similar to what they have been, but his efficiency is better. He seems to be a little bit more engaged defensively. And maybe, year 6 or 7 for him, he finally realizes if he's going to answer questions come playoff time, he's got to change a little bit. Kenny Atkinson has done a great job. That team is really good. What was it like seeing Donovan and watching what he's doing for the Cavs?
Oh, it was great. Honestly, it's hard not to just embrace the guy, the smile, 5 years in Salt Lake, with the Jazz. I think the pressure's off a bit. I mean, Darius Garland is having a tremendous year. Evan Mobley, that's a tough threesome with the big guy Jared Allen, too, in the middle, and their bench with LeVert and even George Niang, former Jazz man. It's weird when you go around and see the guys, the minivan, one of the fan favorites during his tenure, and even Joe Ingles still hanging around up in Minnesota. And Gobert and Conley, the names just are all over the NBA, and they're still producing at a pretty high rate. But yeah, I think Donovan has found a real good home. I think they're on the cusp of being obviously competitive once again. Can they beat Boston? That's yet to be seen. But at the moment, best record in the NBA, and they're solid. They're built to win. They're fast. They hit shots. They're well cooked. They're well coached, as you said, by Kenny. It was, I think, you know what, Spence, even though things happened the way they did, I think Donovan still, always will have a soft spot for the Jazz. Now, I'm not sure about how Jazz fans will feel about it, but there was some good times there. I mean, the Gobert combo, it's sad that COVID hit and the issues from the bubble began to bubble over, not to play on words, but in reality, that's what it was. Time to move on. And it is interesting that I've talked to Booz. We got to put him in the conversation along with D. Will and Hayward. There's a lot of players around the league that have great memories here and think, boy, I shouldn't have listened to, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's your agent, that they had a good deal going. Boozer and D. Will had a pick and roll going like Carl and John in a lot of ways. That was a very good team with a lot of good pieces. But then Sloan and D. Will, and we all know the story and how it went from there and was traded to New Jersey. But, yeah, there's a lot of players who've come back and have mentioned that to me, that, man, it was a good deal here, had a good time, and I was playing some of their best basketball of their career. In fact, it never was the same after they left the Jazz. So we'll see. Donovan has proven that wrong. He's still at a very high level, 8th year, hard to believe, right, in the NBA, and a 5-time All-Star. And I don't see him slowing down anytime soon.
So I wonder, I referenced a couple of wins the team was able to snag on the road. And yes, neither Detroit or Brooklyn are very good, but it has been tough sledding. It will be tough sledding. Did you notice a little bit of a lighter atmosphere after a couple of wins on around the team as you're kind of traveling on the road with them? Did it feel like, after 3 straight L's in a season where you haven't won a ton, just getting a couple of back-to-back wins on the road kind of eased the burden a little bit, I guess is what I'll say?
When you're 7 wins, Spence, and at the time 5, and you get 2 on the road, I think it had to rejuvenate just the whole way you work out, the way you react to your teammates. And, I've talked to Will about it. Players, have to win. I mean, that's part of it. Look, they know the score too. Young, development. You got the vets in here trying to help, and then the vets play. And they're playing pretty well, by the way. Sexton, Collins, and Markkanen's had a little more of a breakout game in those 2 games because some other players were scoring. But, it is what it is. But to win gives you the pride back. The hard work says, okay, that paid off tonight because they didn't make as many mistakes. Or they hit free throws, they hit threes. They played really good defense, mind you, team defense, and that's a key. And so you're starting to see sometimes that they all come together, but they still have work to do. How do you overcome 28 turnovers and 35 points in a win? You hit threes and you hit a ton of free throws. That's how you do it, and play some good D at times. Not all the time, but sometimes, and that's kind of what they were able to find on the road against teams that are also trying to find their way back. You just made that point. These are teams that are all talking lottery, right? And so one win could either disrupt that run to one of the top 3 picks or the number 1 pick along the way. And it's just going to be intriguing once we get to the trade deadline and after the All-Star break, what direction all these teams decide to go and how it all falls into place. That's really kind of the other underlying storyline that's going to continue to play out through the rest of the season.
All right, Craig, I don't really fully know how to ask this, so we're just going to give it a try because I'll say,
Okay.
like when they have when Lowry's healthy, first and foremost, when Clarkson's kind of doing his thing, and obviously he's a little bit older, but there have been some pretty vintage Jordan moments over the past few games, including a nice night against the Cavs. And Collins got it going a little bit, and Walker, who you referenced earlier, to me continues to be the feel-good success story of the Jazz season, period. Like when they have all of their players and when they are kind of playing the style of basketball that Will wants them to play, and also when they're engaged defensively, because there's so many moments that just are not good enough at that end of the floor, there's still a part of me that's like, are they going to do the thing where they win 30 games again and draft 8th or 9th? Because I watch a lot of NBA basketball, and the teams that are front-facing about tanking don't necessarily have the talent on paper the Jazz do. Like, watch Washington or Toronto. There's some horrible, horrible teams in the league, and the Jazz at 7-21 are certainly near the bottom. And I know that incrementally we have seen and probably will continue to see players sit. But when they are playing at their peak, how good is your good, the old saying, do you feel like there's a chance they might be too good to essentially be back in the lottery with a great chance to get the number one pick and maybe win 30, 32 games and draft 8th or 9th? Because part of me is scared we might be headed for that again.
Yeah, Spence, it's the hottest topic of conversation is that there are talented players on this Jazz team, okay? And there are the veterans. And Walker, as you just said, has been rumored to be in multiple conversations, and a lot of people like what Walker can bring. And his defense has improved. His free throw shooting has not, and that's going to be the biggest issue for him moving forward, in my opinion. But you put together the players you just mentioned, and you let them run free, I think, and let them play and intermix with some of the younger guys that the Jazz have drafted. Yeah, I could see 30 wins and flirting with in or out once again of the playoffs or the play-in, I should say. That's not what the Jazz want to do. And I would say that prior to the trade deadline, one of those veterans we just spoke of, or two, most likely won't be here. And that will be the deciding factor again, like it has been the last two seasons, of helping a career along, and also Spence potentially, and this is just me, right, talking, potentially allowing them to improve their trade status to help the Jazz, if that makes sense. John Collins has had a fantastic year. I thought he was the MVP through the first 20 or so games. Now Walker has made a step up, and we know what Sexton is, and we know what JC's all about. Do they stay? Do they go? But I think they've improved their trade status. That would only help the Jazz if that's the direction that Danny and Justin decide to go. And I think you would agree. That then, like with Olynyk and Fontecchio last year, just put the Jazz to who they were, and they put the guys on the floor to finish out the season. I can't remember because I try to forget. I think the Jazz lost 24 of the last 27. Am I close?
Yeah, that's it.
I believe that's the way.
Yeah, that's it.
I think it's the way it went.
Yep.
And I think it's kind of probably the same game plan to see what draft, more picks that may come Danny's way if they do decide to move the vets who I think have helped themselves with another contract, or potentially a team that needs them to push them further deeper into the playoffs. But again, that's going to play itself out. But I don't think Sexton has hurt himself. I don't think JC's hurt himself. I think John has really improved after his first year with the Jazz to help himself if they do decide to move him to another spot. He's only helped himself become a better player.
Yeah, I mean, none of these decisions are easy to make. It just makes you curious as to how long it's going to take to get this thing on track, because it just feels like there's so many people around the community that are just bummed out that there has not been a tremendous amount of tangible progress over the 3 years now, almost 3 years since they traded Gobert and Mitchell. But it's hard to do in the modern day NBA, Craig, because it's a different landscape now. And, I've just kind of been considering what the direction could look like for the Jazz to get back to where we're accustomed to seeing them get back to. And certainly it feels like the draft has to be that avenue. But the draft picks the Jazz have hit on recently have turned out to only be temporary residents of this community.
Yeah.
They leave after a few years. So as far
Yeah.
as the macro view long term, I guess what I'll say is what gives you the most confidence that you're going to be calling winning basketball sooner rather than later?
Well, that's another question. I ask myself, and I'll be totally transparent. It's difficult. T and I talk about it all the time. Look, I'm in the business because I love the game. I like, I love football as well. Anything they've given me a chance to do during my career, I jump in the booth and I want a competitive game. I love winning, of course. It makes my job easier. But you get to know these guys, especially on the Jazz side, and you go, wow, they're good guys on top of it. It's hard not to like Sexton. It's hard not to like JC. And I've got to know John Collins, good guy. But it may be a while, honestly. You make a great point that the Jazz have developed players in the past, but yet they choose to leave. And it does happen in other cities as well. Salt Lake is not by itself, but it still is probably the biggest concern the franchise has. And I've watched it myself, as have you, over the years. And Donovan would be one of those. The Jazz decided to move Rudy and got assets back, but he liked it here. And I think the foreign, the uptick in foreign play and talent, I wouldn't be surprised if that's part of the equation for more than just the Jazz. Several other franchises that may have to depend on a Lauri Markkanen per se, who actually do like the slower pace, who loves the mountains because he's from Finland, reminds him a bit of home, and that does play a part of in his decision making. He actually liked it in Salt Lake, and a lot of players do when they come back and visit. That's interesting, right? But it's Booz likes it here. D. Will decided to stick around here, and Hayward wanted to maybe come back at one point in time. So it's interesting that the dynamics of Salt Lake growing at a rapid rate, by the way. And will that change? That may be down the road, a discussion we'll all get into, is how much is Salt Lake changing? What will downtown look like? What did the Olympics in 34 bring again? And maybe it's, it turns. And maybe players find themselves more intrigued to stay and work a career. But what happens, Spence, as I ramble, but it's true, you win and good things usually happen. Cleveland, not the best destination point, in my opinion, as a traveler and as I jump in, but they find ways to keep players there because they win and they have chances to win titles, and that's what it becomes. If you have the title or the chance to win a title, they will come. For how long? Not probably too long, but enough of that window to give you the opportunity.
Before I set you loose, Craig, some good stuff there. I want to bring you into really what's become the national conversation surrounding pro basketball about lack of interest and lack of ratings. And, the conversation at this point has become exhausting because I think there have been a number of different theories thrown out there that are just basically noise and garbage. But one of the consistent themes I hear, not just from media members who cover the league and not just people who are kind of in the league, but fans who have been watching pro basketball from a macro viewpoint, not just Jazz basketball, they don't like the product as much. It's 3-point heavy. And Kevin Durant, if you missed Durant's diatribe on the league right now, I thought it was really good. He's right. There are plenty of guys taking threes that have no business taking threes. It's just the analytics tell you that 38% from three is better than a contested 18-foot mid-range shot. So let's not take those anymore. And ultimately, it seems like all these coaches have leaned into relying a lot on the three-point shot. Now, I don't agree with the statement that I've heard a couple of times, all the teams play the same, because teams go about trying to get their looks differently. And when you have Steph Curry, it's a little different thing than if you have Colin Sexton, all due respect. But you travel and you go on the road, you call all these games. Do you think the product is down? I mean, I feel like there's more talented players in pro basketball now than there ever has been, and that's just evolution and growth of the modern athlete. But do you feel like the product has suffered what a lot of people believe to be the reason for these declining ratings this year?
Yeah, these conversations are everywhere. And Spence, we talk about it on the road, in the press room, And there's concern there, absolutely. What's wrong with a mid-range jumper? Because analytics have started to come into play more and more. And that's something I think the league has to step back and ask. Basketball has 3 levels of scoring, not one. You can go play low in the post, and the old big man day came and gone, and the mid-range game has come, and now it's taken out to the three-point line. And also, I think the All-Star game became part of the issue where it was just a playground. Look, I think people like competition. They like the entertainment part, but you know what? When it becomes so open where a guy throws a half-court pass, guy catches it, nobody even comes in to defend. These guys are just having a great time, and they still want competition. And I think that's what the league has to be very careful about. I'm glad to see Adam Silver actually try something new with the All-Star weekend, that there is still competitive to bring back competitive play. I don't know how it's going to work, but at least they're trying. But I am concerned that it's only a 3-point league, and maybe this happens down the ranks, Spence. This happens with AAU, that it's just a 3-point game. Kids watch Sports Center or whatever you choose, and they only see the highlight of the day, which is what? It's a game-winning 3. Or it's a 3-point barrage by a Sam Merrill, let's say, from Utah State, Bountiful High, who has that one thing that Big T always talks about that he can do. He can knock down 8 threes against us, which he did the last time out before we saw him in Cleveland a few days ago. But then he warmed up again. So it's how we all absorb the game and what we see. And I think in network television, the 3-ball is celebrated quite a bit. Steph Curry, obviously, is a master at hitting the 3. And we lose our focus on what Durant actually and Booker do in Phoenix, 2 of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA. But that doesn't really stir the pot. That doesn't really feed the beast of highlights where the 3-point shot is king. And I think it's something the league has got to take a look at and be careful with. We talked about this recently, and again, tell me I'm crazy, but should the league limit how many 3-point shot attempts that a team can take? It's something to think about, right? Is it 40? And then after that, you've got to make sure you have a few left in your belt in the fourth quarter. It's something to think about. But I as more and more fans get a little bit more turned off by this, I think the league has to really take a long, hard look and decide what direction they want to go. It has its purpose, but you know what? I don't mind some low post play. I like to see some good, hard, defense down low in the post, like, quote, the old days. But also I like the mid-range game. It's a three-level league, but not much lately. I'm talking about scoring, 3-level scoring. But there's concerns out there. I hear it all the time.
All right, Bowler. Well, I appreciate your time on a game day. I'll be hoping for a good game tonight, if for no other reason, so you can call some good basketball, Jazz Blazers. So have a great call. Travel safe.
Yeah.
We'll chat soon, okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Spence. That's the key. Be competitive, man. So that impacts the fans, right? The TV sets stay on, and you like to see good competition. So that's all I pray for every night, man. That's what I'm hoping for tonight.
No doubt. Thank you, sir. Be well, okay?
All right. Take care.
All right, coming up on the other side, Gordon Monson stops by. We'll get back to some college football with Gordon as BYU is in action on Saturday against Colorado, the latest on the transfer portal for the Utes. And we'll do a little NFL if time allows with Gordon. We also have Eric Weddle on the show today, former Ute. You can call that about a half hour from right now. Move over to Zach Harper later on. We'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock in time for some Thursday night football. It's a drive on a Thursday, so keep it right here on ESPN 700. Eric Weddle is going to stop by just in about 25 minutes from right now. Former Utes. Always appreciate his time. Zach Harper for a little NBA later on as well. But joining us now, the day after Christmas, my guy, my old radio partner, still over at the Salt Lake Tribune doing great work, Gordon Monson, on a Thursday afternoon. Gordo, happy post-Christmas, sir. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks, Spence, and same to you. I hope you had a good one.
Yeah, no, it was fun. Just real quick, are you still participating with the Christmas festivities by making that little bean casserole while Lisa has to make everything else?
No, I do that for Thanksgiving, but for Christmas, she does a old family tradition Italian dinner that I try not to mess up. So, in fact, one time I tried to help, she kicked me out of the kitchen, Spence.
Oh dear.
She kicked me out. So no, but we had a really good day. And I got to tell you something. Do you have a turntable?
I have a record player.
Record player, well, whatever.
Yes.
My daughters gave me that yesterday, along with 4 Beatles albums.
Ooh, nice.
And I can't tell you the last time I actually took a needle and put it down on some vinyl. Man, it's been fun. Let's hear it for the old style.
I'm with you. It's a great way to listen. And also, I still like listening to albums. And these days, it's like they release a single, you pull up Spotify, and you can listen to albums. But what I like about my record players, I just put a record on and listen to the entire album. So I still very much enjoy that.
Yeah, and there's something about the sound, even the little imperfections at times. It just makes it feel real. And so I just listened to the White Album, and it was fantastic. And by the way, a lot of people say different things they like about John Lennon, but that song he wrote to his mom, Julia, is that not just the sweetest thing you ever heard? I mean, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, tremendous songwriter, one of the best of all time. You know that I'm a Lennon over McCartney guy, but McCartney's awesome too. You can like both, Gordon. You're allowed to, right?
Yes, indeed. McLennan.
Right. I love it. Love it. All right. Really illuminating conversation with Jim Herman earlier. Jim used to join you and I on our old show from time to time, and he's a smart guy. He's a former Cougar, played in the NFL, and now he's working with Steve Young and, in the private equity VC space, and they've been very successful, very smart guys. We were talking about just the current chaos in college football. And, Gordon, they have free agency while the season is still being played. I mean, it's like beyond insane. This can't continue. Yes, I mean, you have coaches preparing teams to try to win a national championship, and then they wrap up practice, and they've got to run, the interference to make sure their players aren't transferring. BYU has players in the transfer portal that will not play on Saturday, and there are even teams in the CFP that have had players enter the transfer. Like, this can't continue. Yes, this has to change.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. They've got to do something. There's a lot of things. It's amazing to me that something that's as popular as college football can have the numerous problems or issues that it needs to have solved. And this is one of them. And it seems like it would be fairly easy, at least to make it look like it's done without the chaos. Now, it actually, preventing the chaos may be a different matter, but at least make it seem like it's a little more difficult for this to happen the way it is. And there's other problems too, Spence, and I hate to say it because you and I both love college football, but, the SEC is trying to run college football. You heard all the complaints about the first-round games in the playoff, and, I thought it was interesting that the SEC and the Big Ten were actually kind of sniping at each other over, Indiana shouldn't have been in there. They got crushed by Notre Dame, and then other people saying, well, wait a minute, look at Tennessee, look what happened there. I mean, it's just there's all this stuff going on, and maybe it's always been that way, but this is the fresh batch that we're all sort of looking at right now.
So, I mean, ultimately, and I talked about this with Jim, you and I have kind of kicked the tires on it. Gordon, I feel like they've got to rip the Band-Aid off, and they've got to lean into the pro model. And that's not a super popular take because from what I've read and from what I understand, coaches want that. I think it would be better for the players. The players aren't necessarily being adversely affected right now because they're finally making money, which they always should have been able to do in a free market system. They now just have the same basic economic rights you and I have. So I'm for that. But there really isn't any issue that seems to be plaguing college football right now that can't be solved by simply leaning into the pro model and allowing players to collectively bargain and unionize. And the question is, where's the central leadership? What does the college football equivalent of the commissioner's office in the NFL look like? And it feels like a lot of these private equity guys are going to get involved and buy stakes in teams. And maybe there's something there, but there's a lot of red tape you have to traverse, because I know administrators don't love this idea. They don't want their, I'll just use the term, even though I'm going to puke in my mouth, student athletes to be employees. They don't. And schools are owned in no small part by states, and private institutions have different challenges. Public institutions, you probably have to include the governor, and you probably have to include our local legislators to figure out something to be done if you want to buy 48% of Utah football. But I can tell you, and you know, if the venture capitalists, private equity guys get involved with this, they will make sure it's ran the right way, because one thing rich people don't like to do is lose money on investments. They want to make sure their money's taken care of. This feels like an angle where maybe the guy's in charge of the money, and the golden rule is, we know the golden rule, the man who has the gold makes the rules. Maybe they can come up with a governing body with central leadership to get this thing going in the right direction. So give me your thoughts on that type of approach, because something needs to be done.
Yeah, I agree. However that will be formed, please don't let the government get involved in it, because, legislatures screw everything up. They screw up a lot of things, right? I don't want to get political, but it's just there's got to be a way. But it just takes college football. It just takes them forever. It's glacial the way they move. And what's happened is we saw how long it took them to expand the playoff, right? We had all that run up to it and all those arguments and discussion leading up to what seems like it should have been in place a long time ago. And I don't even care if they expand it, but it just takes forever to get it to go. And now all these issues come about relatively quickly, and it's so cumbersome. It's like turning an aircraft carrier. It's difficult to get these guys to come together to do what's best for the game. And maybe for the student athlete, if you want to use that term, again, I agree with you. Private equity firms will get involved. It will be professionalized. And when that happens, then those people are going to insist upon having a little more organization, a better form to what they're dealing with, because they will make money when they get involved in it. And the colleges will accept their influence and their money because they love money. That's why. That's what they'll do. And I think it will be fixed. It's just a matter of how long it's going to take.
From a, strictly from a BYU standpoint, it's interesting when the AJ DeBansa news was announced, and then the NIL figure of $7 million to play basketball at Brigham Young for 5 months was floated out there. Automatically, folks pointed to Ryan Smith and Danny Ainge. Danny, of course, was in Massachusetts when AJ was growing up, and my understanding is he met with the family a couple of times. Ryan sent out on social media he did not, essentially pay AJ. You can color me unconvinced that that's the case, but ultimately, I do believe that BYU's collective, with money from Ryan and others, I've been told they have 9 7-figure donors right now, and Utah's number isn't that high. I think it's 3 or 4 for Utah, and there is a bit of an arms race. But what do you attribute most to what appears to be a pretty successful traversing of the space with the early data size from Brigham Young at this point?
Because they do have the money. They have access to the money. It's funny because in the past and by years gone by, they've always had certain people in place to help them. It was a matter of whether the institution itself, and by institution they take it all the way up to the church, whether they would be willing to accept that and set that model in place. And so the money has been there. And contrary to what a lot of people think, I don't think it's necessarily church money pouring into these things. However, you can figure out whichever category you want, the way, the stacks, the piles are on the table here, there, and maybe they get mixed up sometimes. But I think it's just coming from very motivated boosters who want to be involved with what's happened and have always wanted to be involved, and now they've been given the green light to do exactly that. So that's what BYU has done. And Utah, I don't know where the line is between Utah catching up and where BYU is, but Utah will close the gap. I'm relatively certain of that because their folks are going to rally too.
And that's where I wanted to go next, because we both have sort of teased this potential good news coming down the pipeline for Utah football. And I continue to try to gently walk around the subject a little bit without betraying the trust of people that have informed me of certain things. But I know you've been informed of similar things. And I've been told the timeline, hopefully, end of January, maybe February-ish. But the type of transaction that is in the works right now regarding Utah and what this could look like for the athletic department and the football team specifically, let's call it how it is, should really excite Ute fans. And I don't know that I can say anymore. I don't know if you have anything else to add, but right now the narrative around town is that in this arms race, BYU is lapping Utah. And certainly from a basketball standpoint, when you lock in a generational talent, and then a football standpoint, when you just come off a 10-win season and have an Alamo Bowl matchup against an intriguing team, it's easy to connect the dots and say right now BYU appears to be in the lead. But anything else you'd like to add about this potential really exciting news for Utah athletics that is coming down the pipeline within the next few months, I think?
Yeah, you and I have whispered back and forth about it. I know you have your sources. I have mine. I think Utah is in a good position to get a little deeper pockets and to close that gap that you were speaking of. As far as the way it's going to pertain to basketball, that I don't know, because it just seems like Utah basketball right now. I don't even know how to really describe it as far as the program itself and as far as the ability to draw fans, put fans in the seats. That's where BYU is really outdoing the Utes right now. But football, you would expect football to be relatively even in this regard because of the success the Utes have had in recent years or recent decades, I guess. And I think it's going to come. It's going to happen. And Ute fans, don't fret too much, because it's going to be put in place in a way that I think, as far as the money goes, will be extremely competitive. And if there's money there and it's properly utilized, then guess what follows? Wins, success. And that will be in place for both Utah and BYU, I believe.
Yeah, no, I concur there with that last point. So as of now, according to 24/7 Sports, University of Utah has the number 22 ranked transfer portal class. They have 12 commits. BYU is down at this point 57 with 4 commits. There have been a few BYU players who've announced that they're in the portal that will not be playing on Saturday, which is wild, as we talked about, namely Crew Wakely, one of their really good defensive backs. But from a Utah perspective, they've had to rely on transfers, 12 incoming, 13 actually with some news that came down with the Utah State wide receiver. But they're losing 22 players. Well, there are 22 players in the portal. You got to be careful. But at this point, Cameron Calhoun is already committed to Alabama. And then right before we signed off air on Monday, it was announced that Keanu Tanavasa, which hurts badly, is also in the portal. Now, he hasn't announced his intention. Maybe he comes back. But Utah football is essentially rebuilding. It's like a one-year rebuild. I mean, it's going to be a new quarterback, a new running back, new defensive linemen, new defensive backs. And BYU seems to be relying more on continuity and growth in-house that worked for them a year ago. 2 different models. Are you confident that both can work? I mean, Arizona State just showed us, and Kenny Dillingham just showed us, that you can get this thing going quickly. I mean, Arizona State was a program left for dead after Herm Edwards left it in shambles, and they're winning. They're champs of the Big 12. They're in the CFP with a first-round bye. So if you're a BYU fan or a Ute fan, I guess right now mostly just a Ute fan because BYU had a good year, there are models to look at that indicate that you can get this thing going in the right direction in the Big 12 quickly. But if you're a rebuilding like Utah is, how realistic is that next year?
Well, what is contrasting to this idea of what Utah will need to do is what they've done in the past. Think about how they've developed players in the past. Well, the past isn't the present. I mean, if BYU wants to try and follow that model because they had a successful year this year and they think they can develop by recruiting high school athletes and then maybe filling in a few transfers here and there, then if they think they can do that, then they did it. They did it this year. But, you know, a lot of BYU's games were pretty tight. And so I've heard that said by some of the folks down at BYU that, hey, we had a really good year. We don't need to change a whole lot of things. Well, you gotta keep progressing, because if you just sit where you were, I'm not sure that's going to get it done. And maybe some of those games that were so close this last year, well, you know, it may not work out in your favor moving forward. Now, I understand that all the teams are whittling down to that 105 number, and so they've got to unload some players. But you heard Kyle Whittingham say it as the season ended that they were going to go out and get 40 new players, half of them via the transfer portal, and that's right on schedule. And the others are other recruits. And I just don't think the difference between the programs this last year were that great. Yeah, BYU had the upper hand, and they had the far better season. But, man, I'll tell you, that line is pretty thin. And you always got to progress forward, or else someone's going to catch you or lap you or beat you. And so I think BYU they don't want to disrupt the chemistry they have down there. And I guess I understand that. And they feel like the culture is pretty good. So if it, you know, the old saying, if it ain't broke, then why fix it? But you got to continually add talent. But Utah is doing exactly that out of sheer necessity, man. Last year, that just isn't going to sit well with Utah fans, nor with the coaches that are on hand, or the players for that matter.
Utah State, you know, Broncos got work to do. And I'm just curious as to get your take on how long you think this will take Bronco to kind of get on the right direction. They have two incoming transfers. Miles Davis, who was at BYU last year, is going to go up and play at Utah State. Kid named Brevin Hamblin, who I don't know much about, is also going to play up in Logan. Otto Tia, a really good wide receiver up there, just announced his intent to come to Salt Lake to play for the Utes. So he was in the transfer portal, and now he is not coming back. They currently have 27 players in the transfer portal, and we talked last week about Bronco's pedigree of really being able to – he's been tasked with turnarounds at least two different spots, if not three, and has shown that he is up for this challenge. But for our Aggie fans, Gordon, how long do you think it's going to take Bronco to get this thing back where it needs to be?
A little while. It won't be immediate, but you will see immediate improvement. Why? Because Bronco Mendenhall's a good coach, and he knows how to motivate players, and I think in some cases recognize what needs to be plugged in where. I mean, the first year he was the head coach at BYU, the fact that BYU went to a bowl game that year, it was unbelievable with the talent they had at that particular time. You know, what were they? I was 6-6. I can't remember the exact numbers, but he really turned it there. He turned it at Virginia, and he'll turn it at Utah State. And he turned it at New Mexico, too, in a positive direction. So you can mark this down now. And I'm a little hesitant to say this since I also predicted that the Utes would win the conference and go to the college football playoff this last year. So take this for what it's worth. But I think Bronco Mendenhall will turn that program around. And if I had to give you a time frame, I think I would say within 2 years.
Okay, I like that. But it is going to take a minute for sure. But his pedigree as a program kind of rebuilder is undeniable. All right, before we set you loose, I don't know what to ask you about the Jazz, but we had Bowler on last segment. And so what I'll ask is the same question I asked him. If you looked in the Gordon Monson Godfather crystal ball, when will Craig Bolerjack be calling high-level winning basketball again?
I would – well, I'll say it this way at first. All the Jazz fans out there ought to root for the Jazz to lose. That's just what has to happen. You and I have talked about this before. Root for the Jazz to lose and celebrate every time they do. That's a good news, bad news thing because, you want to develop a few of the players that you have. But I think some of the few useful pieces that the Jazz have can improve greatly as talent is added to them. And the only way they could really do that, unless Danny Ainge is going to outsmart somebody in some kind of big deal that nobody sees right now, it's going to take some time. But they have to have fortuitous draft picks. And if they do that, then a time frame there, Spence, I really wonder whether it'll happen within Bowler's time frame. What Bowler's going to work until he's 95, right? I mean, so I guess it might happen within his career, but it's not going to happen for a number of years.
If I asked you to send me a picture of the bean casserole next Thanksgiving, is that something that you're willing to do? Because I'm not 100% convinced that you actually do this.
I will send you a picture. I'm surprised nobody has asked me for that in the past. But I do have testimonials if you're willing to accept those. But I will take a picture and send it along. I do that. I mean, I made when Quinn Snyder was here, he came up with that chocolate dessert pie thing, ice cream pie thing, and I replicated that, and I took a picture of it and sent it to him, and he was impressed. And I've been bragging for 43 years about my great spaghetti, and my kids never believed me, and I whipped up a batch earlier, a couple months ago, took a picture of it. They all were, I'd say, well, let me say it this way. There used to be a show called The Galloping Gourmet. It was a cooking show. And I will confess that this particular jockey in the kitchen is at a slow trot right now.
The Galloping Gourmet. Let's see. When was this? This was like 1968, Gordon. What are you referencing a show that was on in the 60s? Goodness.
Well, look, my favorite music, when I talk to you about the Beatles, maybe I'm stuck in that time warp of some sort. I don't know. But I do remember that show. And like I said, I'm just trotting along. It's trotting, not galloping, trotting.
Hey, well, it's better than standing still. As long as you keep moving forward, Gordon. That's all we ask. All right, my friend. If I don't see you or talk to you, Happy New Year to you and yours. Thanks for the time, and we'll get you on soon, okay?
All right, Spence. Thanks a lot.
All right, the great Gordon Monson from the Salt Lake Tribune, my longtime radio partner back in the old days, brought to you today by Clearwater Distilling. It's the only distillery in Utah County open on Sundays. With the holidays around the corner, make Clearwater a one-stop shop with their bottles, swag, and gift cards. They make the perfect stocking stuffer. It's a perfect time right now because they just did a major rebrand of their cinnamon whiskey. It's now called Canella Cinnamon Whiskey, formerly their Scandalust. If you need a spot to celebrate this holiday season with your loved ones or your coworkers, make it Clearwater Distilling. Their Victorian tasting room makes a great date night or a fun activity anytime. You can buy their spirits in state liquor stores online or make a trip to their beautiful distillery. More can be found at clearwaterdistilling.com. All right, about 2 hours down. We got about 2 hours to go. Eric Weddle and Zach Harper are your 4 o'clock hour, some college football and some NBA. So keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, Zach Harper's going to roll by. NBA Daily Assist style. Good NBA games yesterday. A couple of NFL games that were just blowouts. The week of pro football wraps up tonight. We have the Thursday night game. It's the Bears and the Seahawks. You'll hear that right after we say goodnight at 6 o'clock. But let's do some more college football. One of our favorites, the legend himself, Eric Weddle, on a Thursday. Ewed, happy post-Christmas, buddy. How we doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Merry Christmas to you and the fam. Hope everyone had a great one. Good to be on.
Appreciate your time as always. And, we find ourselves in such an interesting landscape, Eric, as you know. And I've been talking about it all show with college football guests. Excited to get your take on it. We have free agency while the season is still going on. Coaches are trying to coach. Like, Kalani's getting ready for a good game, Alamo Bowl against Colorado. He's got 10 kids that are in the portal that aren't going to play in the game. And then there are teams that are trying to win a national championship, and coaches are trying to prepare for the biggest games of the season, and their players are into the transfer portal. Help me fix the sport that you and I both love.
Gosh, I could go on a whole hour about this, the way the state of college football is and how it's affecting the high school kids the most. Of all the kids that are getting the shaft and all this, it's the high school kids. And now with this JC rule going through, if it's banned, why would any coach recruit high school kids when you can recruit JC kids that have 2 years that won't count against their eligibility for the 4-year schools? So there's a lot of craziness, a lot of things that I don't agree with, and it's pay to play. It's not name, image, and likeness. It's where can I go to make the most money, and it's not culture building. It's not what university could help me become a great man. It's none of that, and it's hard to watch. Can't fault the kids. The system is what it is. How I'd fix it, I'd get rid of the portal. I would put some regulations on what you can earn for your name, image, and likeness. It's not, hey, give you $1 million here to come play for me. That's not what it was designed for. So many issues with it. It's just hard to be involved with.
Tell me from your end, because you referenced how it's affecting the high school kids, and that's your space now. You're doing some coaching. I would be genuinely curious, as somebody like you who knows how to lead, you did it as a player both in college and the pros. What do you say to your kids as they're getting ready to enter this space where they're going to hear from colleges and potentially agents? How does a high school coach handle the modern landscape of college football right now, Eric?
You got to have a good head on your shoulders, and you got to. What's most important to you is it to make a quick buck, or is it to make relationships that'll last a lifetime? Is it somewhere where you can build the right attributes to be a great man someday and to learn how to handle adversity, learn how to be a good teammate, learn how to lead? Those things happen of being part of a program, not jumping program to program every 6 months, trying to learn a new system, try to learn your teammates, trying to learn the head coach. That stuff doesn't lead to success, in my opinion. So the reality is this is what it is. I would hope for programs to start emphasizing development and building from the youth with high school kids and pouring into the younger guys that cherish and value the culture and value the program and value the team. A we, not me type attitude. That's what I would focus in instead of trying to get the quick fix of a portal kid to just fill some holes on your roster.
It's difficult because you also have a situation here in Salt Lake, Eric, as we move over to the University of Utah. Coach Witt referenced the number of 40 players that they want to bring in, and that's both with high school recruits incoming to campus and then the transfer portal as well. And that essentially means that Utah football will be entirely rebuilt in 1 year. And in pro football or pro basketball or pro sports, you run into rebuilds every, 6, 7, 8 years. It depends on how smart your front office is. It depends on how good your ownership is. But right now, a lot of programs, namely the University of Utah, are going to be marching out a team next year that's totally rebuilt. What's reasonable to expect from Utah football when they're really going to have a brand new coaching staff in a lot of ways and a brand new roster.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers to that. I just know turning over your roster isn't, in my opinion, okay, I'm not in it, so take my opinion with a grain of salt, right? But I think that if you build, maybe the number's 50-50 high school to portal kids. Maybe it's 70-30. You pick holes that you need an immediate starter right now, but you develop from within. You almost like in the NFL, you reward a guy that you drafted with a new contract because he earned it. And he's a great ambassador of your organization for the city. Like, it's no different now at the college landscape. So why do you want someone else that's leaving the program for whatever reason as a stopgap? Well, if you pour into the young guys in your program, they're going to be loyal to you. You hope at the end of the day. I just don't understand for the life of me how it even gets to the point where you're entering the portal as a returning starter. Like, they need to crack down on the guardrails of who's communicating with these kids, who's the ones that are inside these universities knowing what they can offer these kids if they hit the portal. Like, that needs to be reeled in. That should be non-existent. Like, these kids are returning starters going in the portal for how do they even know that they're going to get that? Like, it's just slimy and wrong on so many ways, and everyone's doing it. But how is that not put in stone that if you communicate with a kid, then that should be illegal, and the school should get reprimanded for it? Like, it's just hard.
It's hard and it's unfortunate. It really is too bad. But I will say, what does it say to you about the product of college football and the sport of college football that even with the chaos off the field, the ratings keep rising and people still watch? I mean, it has to speak to the power of what this sport is, that regardless of how bad the business is run, consumers still consume it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a great product. The product is lessening year in and year out with the rule changes, with the amount of turnover on your roster every year. That limits what you can do, offense, defense, special. Okay, so that means you're limiting what you can do, limiting what you can put out there on the field. You can't stress them enough if they were in the system for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Well, they know it. That means you can expand it. That means you can push them harder. It's not. You dummy it down so these guys can learn it in a quick time. It means everyone's running the same crap, the same, spread them out. You got RPOs, you got inside zone, a little sprint out action, and they all line up on the sides. They don't huddle out of the huddle. I mean, they don't break the huddle, and they look to the sideline for the routes. Like, what are we really teaching and developing these kids, right? They don't know formation. They don't know motions. They don't know shifts. They don't know check with me. They don't know audibles. Like, and you get into the NFL, and that's why you see some struggle and some has an easy transition. But, that's what the NFL is becoming. A lot of basic, generic offenses out there that are easy to translate. So I don't know. The landscape, it is what it is. Like, basketball is horrendous to watch. Nobody watches that. Baseball is boring to watch unless you're in person. Hockey, the same thing. So I think society is the only thing really exciting to watch is the NFL and college football. So that doesn't surprise me that the ratings are still high. It does know if people who play the game know the product is not a very good product that we're watching.
See, that's really interesting. So let me follow up, because I have not heard very many people offer the opinion that the product is suffering on the college football landscape, and you kind of outlined reasons as to why. So I guess what I'll ask you is, is there like this permeating fear that, in your opinion, the product will continue to suffer unless we get things figured out where there's a little more continuity? And are you concerned about the future of the sport?
Well, I think a lot of it, I'm speaking more of the NFL compared to the college. A lot of how the NFL is run is you're limited on padded practices. You're limited on how much tackling you're doing. Most cases, second half of the year, you're not even in pads at that moment. So it trickles down to college. Like, how much are you really practicing blocking and tackling? That is football, okay? The great teams that win block the best and tackle the best. Okay, it's not 7-on-7. It's not, hey, we throw the ball 50, 60 times a game. And what you're seeing is less time dedicated to that and more time to making it simplified so the guys can transition from a new school, get on the field, and do what they do best. Okay, so I don't know. In my mind, I'm never going to sacrifice team and scheme because that gives us an advantage every time we cross the field, right? That is our advantage. We're not just going to sacrifice that so other guys can adjust quickly. If they can't adjust, they shouldn't be a part of our program, and maybe you should develop within. Like, that's my opinion on that.
No, it's some really interesting stuff. Like I said, I feel like the narrative is a lot of folks continue to watch and really love college football despite the chaos.
Watch,
yeah.
The ones that have played know the type of football that we're watching is not high-level football.
Mm-hmm.
You could ask any old player that's played, NFL or college, and when you watch it, it's not sophisticated. It's not high-level X's and O's. You're not seeing in timing. You're not seeing, multiple things, offense, defense, schematically. It's very vanilla, basic, line up and play.
Are there exceptions to that? Are there coaching staffs you think do like, who do you like to watch?
Shoot. You're talking collegiate or NFL?
Either way, either level.
Well, the top organizations in the league have a standard, and they do what they do. Offensively, I think Detroit, Ben Johnson, he's on another level schematically and how he draws up plays and gives his team advantage. I think Sean McVay, obviously, have a close relationship with him. And, when you're talking collegiate, you could say the history and how they've developed their skill guys and quarterbacks over the last 3 years is Ohio State. But, man, when is the last time they beat someone in a big game? So it goes back. They beat who they're supposed to be. They get in a big game. We'll see how they do against Oregon. But, it's you only can do with what you have. Okay, I'm not naive. You have players, you're coaching. If you don't win, you're probably going to get fired. So I get that. And you got to adapt. I'm not saying don't adapt, but I'm saying structurally as a program, what are we laying our hat on? Are we laying our hat on, still turn out 40 to 50 guys a year, or are we hanging our hat on development, culture, program building? And for me as an alum, that's what I wish or hope that we continue to do or try to do instead of just trying to find the next plug-and-play player.
So tell me what the confidence level is, Eric, with you and, your friends that played up at the University of Utah, because what you just described, in my opinion, describes a Kyle Whittingham program, player development, always has been. And it's a new, different era in college football. Do you feel like Utah and the coaching staff have adjusted, and will they still be able to use the old approach that works so well in the new day and age of college football?
I think it can work, but again, I'm not in there. I don't know what's going on, how those conversations happen. For a guy like Calhoun, did they have a meeting with them? Did they talk about what he's getting paid? Does it need to be up for a high-level starter in the Big 12? Like, I don't know those questions, right? And I don't know what he got at Alabama. My point is, why is he even in the portal, right? Like, how does that even happen where he thinks I can get more? I'm not happy here. Like, when is enough, right? And so I don't know. I think they're going too much portal kids and not enough younger guys and keeping them, but I don't know the situation. Are they being told to leave, right? Like, do they not want to be there because they're backups? I don't know those questions. So it's hard for me to say what I wish we would do because I'm not intimate in those conversations and the roster building and what they have compared to what they need. So I just would say what I would do, and I would try to do it like 60-40, 70-30 of high school development, and then those 2 to 4 players you need to plug and play because you have a hole, you go find those guys and get them.
When we last had you on, and Eric Weddle is with us, the former Ute legend, Super Bowl champ. When we last had you on, Eric, we weren't sure if Coach Witt was coming back, and there was not an offensive coordinator. Well, in the time that's passed, Kyle Whittingham is elected to come back for year 21, and Jason Beck is the new OC. Just wanted to get your reaction when you heard those two pieces of news.
Yeah, I mean, I expected Coach Witt to come back. I mean, he probably doesn't want to go out like that. You know, with the situation with Morgan hanging in the balance, and was it this year? Is it next year? Like, I think that needs to be communicated with everyone, right? Like, we're not hanging at the edge of the seat for the recruits, for the program. But I'm glad he's coming back. He's a legend. You know, I wouldn't be here today without Coach Witt. So I think it's better that he's around and moving forward. You know, with the offensive coordinator, I don't know. You know, like, I hope they hired a great guy and he's innovative and he pushes the limit and he makes our offense better than what it's been, because we've struggled at times and we've been really good at times. And I think a lot of times it comes back to players, and you can only do so much as a coach, right? Players win games. Coaches most times find ways to lose it.
Interesting perspective. All right, before I set you loose, I just want to get – I know you're an alum, and I know you love the staff, and I know you love the team, and I know you're always going to look at it through a Ute positive lens, but there's a feel around here. There's a nervous feel from the fan base that after a rough year and, you know, a new coaching staff and talented players leaving either via graduation or the transfer portal, that this next season might feel like the last. I'm going to ask you, Eric, before I set you loose, what gives you the most confidence that year 2 in the Big 12 will look better than year 1 did?
Well, I mean, we have a standard, and the standard is that we're a top-notch program on and off the field. Okay, that didn't happen last year for a number of reasons. Reality is we didn't get it done, so changes were made. You got to hope and believe that the hiring on the offensive side and the system that he's going to bring in place is going to be a good one that can maximize our potential offensively. Defense, we're always going to have a top-notch defense. So if we could couple our offensive production, then we'll be one of the best teams in the Big 12 in the country. And that's been the case for the last 15 years. So that doesn't change. I will always have confidence that we play our style of football, offense, defense, special teams. We could beat anybody on the field. Now we couple it with great people, talented football players, play together, play as one. You got a special team. If you can't have that dynamic with the team and how close they are playing together and playing complementary football, then you're going to struggle. That's whether you have new coaches or not.
Well, all right, Eric, I appreciate the time, man. I always appreciate the truth telling. So I'll wish you a happy new year. Thank you for your time. I'd love to have you back on soon, okay?
You got it, buddy. Anytime.
All right, the great Eric Weddle, legendary career here and then killed it in pro football, won a Super Bowl, probably high speed head of the Hall of Fame. Certainly should be. Appreciate Eric's time. On this Thursday afternoon, we're going to shift gears and do a little NBA and some jazz coming up. We're back to college football in the 5 o'clock hour. Zach Harper will join us on the other side of a quick break, but let's welcome in Ryan from the Dish Professionals. During this holiday season, you probably spent a lot of time at home. Well, how's your internet? Are you paying too much for it? How's your television watching experience? Do you look at your streaming and cable bill and bemoan how much you're paying for it? How about your wireless situation, you and your family? Affordable options for all three of those. With Ryan from the Dish Pros, if you dial 801-424-DISH. What's going on, Ryan? All right, we'll try to get Ryan back on. He dropped. My guess is he's driving around town running some errands. So we're going to bring in Zach Harper coming up. We'll get back to college football in the 5 o'clock hour. I want to remind you that you can hear the final game of the Pro Football Week/weekend coming up tonight on the station. It is going to be the Seahawks and the Bears live at Soldier Field in Chicago. It's a must-win for Seattle if they want to stay alive in the playoff race. Chicago, at this point, you might as well just lose to get better draft capital, surround your young quarterback with better pieces. Seattle 5-point favorite, over-unders 41.5. It looks like it'll be a decent forecast in Chicago for this time of year, about 46 degrees. So that'll come your way coming up after we say goodnight. The Jazz are in action tonight, taking on the Portland Trail Blazers. That is going to be an 8 o'clock kick time. Excuse me. Football on the mind. 8 o'clock tip time. Jazz and the Blazers in action tonight. And then obviously college football bowl season rolling along, a couple of days away from BYU, Colorado coming up on Saturday. Then hopefully the quarterfinals of the CFP are a little bit better than the first round. So that's kind of the bulk of the show today. Pat Riley came out today and said the Miami Heat are not trading Jimmy Butler. So for all the teams that were hoping to grab Jimmy Butler, apparently he's off the table. I'll just tell you to give Ryan from the Disc Pros a call. Number is 801-424-DISH. That's 801-424-DISH. Going to bring in Zach Harper coming up next right here on ESPN 700. The red-hot Utah Jazz are in action tonight, taking on the Portland Trail Blazers. The Jazz have won 2 of 3. Two teams that aren't great at basketball will do battle. We had a fun Christmas Day slate of games. Porter is out of town, which means I'm picking the music today. So you might not know that it's Zach Harper, no Pitbull. But, Zach, I figured a little round ball rock would be good this Thursday, yeah?
It's the only acceptable substitution.
Okay, good. I'm glad I knocked that out of the park. What did Christmas Day look like at the Harper household this year?
Oh man, it was great. We cooked, we opened presents, we watched basketball, we played Clue, we did everything.
You played Clue, the old school board game?
Oh yeah, no,
nice.
That's a big battle with my nieces and my sister and my brother-in-law. Like it's a big battle we do every time they're here.
Gotta love it. I'll tell you what, man. The Christmas Day NBA slate was great. Football games were a blowout, but what were some of the more enjoyable moments of watching NBA basketball on Christmas Day?
I mean, I think like we can start with Wemby, right? Like Wemby, 42 points, 18 rebounds. Like he was just remarkable. And I think, you know, while he's been good for a while and we've obviously known that he's great and everything, and we've seen some incredible stat lines out of him, he had a bad game at Madison Square Garden last year as a rookie. It was very early on in his rookie season. He hadn't really found his footing yet. But to follow that up, I think he had like 14 points on 14 shots in that one. To follow that up with 42, 18, 4 and 4, hitting 6 threes, like he's just unreal. And then that whole moment with, you know, Steph leading that comeback against the Lakers and then Austin Reeves getting that layup at the end. I mean, it's just that's the kind of action the NBA needs when the NFL starts encroaching on everything that they're doing on Christmas Day.
Do you feel like it's intentional? Do you feel like and I thought LeBron after the game, like I love the NFL, but this is our day.
Yeah.
Is it calculated by the NFL to do this, or do they just exist in a different stratosphere where the rules don't really apply to them?
I mean, I think it's both. Like, I think it's intentional. I think the rules don't apply to the NFL because they're the NFL. But I mean, they played 2 football games on a Wednesday. Like, you can't tell me that's not intentional. If it falls on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, for them to throw games out on those days on a Wednesday, it doesn't even make sense with their scheduling in the slightest. And so it's definitely intentional, but also, you know, I don't think they care if the NBA is upset. They don't have to be friends with the NBA. None of that has to be the case. It's kind of like, you know, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a blogger from 2011 and make a comparison to The Wire. It's like when, you know, Marlo starts trying to go for everybody's corners. Like, that's what it is. Like, the NFL is going for the NBA's corners.
Welcome into the Bill Simmons podcast with Zach Harper. I'm just playing.
Really about Karate Kid.
I'm just playing. I thought it was a good day for the league. It's interesting. I don't know if you heard this, but Bob Myers before the Laker-Warrior game, he said there are only 3 superstars in the league right now: LeBron James, Stephen Curry, and Kevin Durant. What's your take on that? And why do you think he made that statement?
I think those are the 3 stars the NBA knows how to market right now. I mean, you know, like I don't know how real these numbers are or what they mean, but, you know, there was some top 10 list of like the NBA put out of like the most viewed players on social media. And 7 of those players ended up playing on Christmas Day. But like, you know, John Morant was number 2 for most viewed on social media. LaMelo Ball was in there. Like, you know, there are stars. Wemby was in there. Like, there are other stars in the league. Now, not every network talks about those other stars in the league, but like Jokic is a superstar. Giannis is a superstar. Like, I thought Giannis's comments, while it was kind of sour grapes about not being on Christmas Day, I also think there's something to it. Like, if you can't figure out how to market the Bucks with Giannis and Dame and put them in a big time game, like, yeah, I think that's a bit of an issue. You know, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I've been whining about this for a few weeks now. Like, it's not that the Thunder are a small market or that Shai is an unknown superstar. It's just the NBA's bad at marketing them.
Why do you think that is? Because it seems to be something that if it's not going to affect you now, like LeBron's 40 and Steph's 36, and, you know, KD hasn't been able to stay healthy for a full season for a long, long time. Like, what do you think the deal is with the NBA's either inability or unwillingness to lean into what will come next after these players decide they're done, which is not going to be very long now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not equating them to this quality of whatever, but I think marketing LeBron and Steph and KD, it's like deciding to have fast food for dinner, right? It's easy. Like, you know what it is. You know what it's going to be, and it's easy, and you don't have to do much to prepare for it. Whereas, I got to figure out how to make Memphis and Ja Morant exciting. It shouldn't be hard. Just show clips of Ja Morant playing basketball. We all watch it, and we all marvel at it. But for some reason, I think part of this is the landscape of media and the platforms and everything being so spread out. I think part of it is that. I think part of it is Adam Silver's just not as good at that stuff as David Stern was. And I think David Stern can make stars out of just about anybody. I think Adam Silver has struggled to do that. But, to your point, they've only got a couple more years until they got to force these other guys. And maybe Wemby will be so good by then that it won't matter, and that will be the Goliath to topple. But it's just something the NBA struggles with, and I don't understand why, because we watch all those other stars, and if you can't make them interesting, I don't think you're good at marketing.
Well, and also they really, say what you want about the tired discourse of ratings going down, but the NBA has not done a very good job of telling their story as to what the context is with those. And Kevin Durant came out with some interesting comments. And when Durant gets insightful and honest and he actually wants to give people time, he's pretty good at this stuff, always has been. It's just these moments are few and far between. But the context is how many people have cut the cord and the fact that ratings are down everywhere, including the NFL. Now, the NFL is only down 4%, but, you have now Netflix in the game. You've got Amazon Prime in the game. You've got Peacock in the game, and you still have linear television. But the linear ratings that everybody continues to, reference when it comes to the NBA's fall in interest are affecting everybody. But I just don't think the league has, told that story very well.
Yeah, and I don't think they want to tell that story, right? Because it's probably a harsh reality in some sense. I also don't think it's a big deal in the grand scheme of things because of that media rights deal that came through and everything. But I think it'll be very interesting to see how the NBA operates and presents viewership numbers and viewership results of the streaming services in the next, once that next deal kicks in, which is next season, with things being on Peacock, with things being on Amazon Prime, with more stuff being streaming. Then at that point, we never really know what stuff does on Netflix, right? There's no check and balance for what their viewership is. We know a lot of people have Netflix. We know they have a lot of money, but we never know how many people are actually watching. So you can kind of promote it and massage it however you want. I'm curious how the NBA will do that in the streaming era once this next deal kicks in next season.
One of the consistent things that I've either read or heard, or we've got a lot of good NBA guests on the show, and it's not everybody, but a lot of people have indicated they do believe the product has suffered. Now, I feel like there's more talent in the league than there ever has been. And I've never been the whole, let's go back to the 90s guy. But
right.
I do think at times the lack of effort is pretty obvious. Some of the all-star game stuff is spilled into some of the regular season stuff. But in your opinion, the product itself, the game itself, the product of NBA basketball, does it feel different or compromised to you at all when you sit down and watch a game?
Man, I would have said yes a year ago, but the start of this season, the basketball's been awesome. It's really been incredible, and so I kind of think it's a lazy criticism of the product on the floor. People just look at 3-point numbers and say, "Oh, there's too many threes." Yeah, there might be too many threes, but for the most part, the game so far this season, the product on the floor so far this season has been excellent. It can improve. I think they should bring back hand checking with the way that skill sets and athleticism and everything is now. I think you can compromise a little bit of offense to create more competition, and I think it would be a benefit to the league. But I don't feel the way about the product I did a year ago. I actually think it's improved quite a bit.
Is that mainly, in your estimation, a result of influx of talent, younger talented players growing? Wembanyama just looks different this year than he did a year ago, and he looked awesome a year ago. And you've got a lot of young players that are kind of growing into themselves a little bit. And also, it should be noted, I referenced earlier, LeBron and Steph and KD and these guys are probably retiring sometime soon. they're still playing at a really high level at advanced age.
Right.
Do you think it's just like the old guard continues to do what it does and young players understanding how to be pros? What do you attribute to what you call an improved product year over year?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you just said is part of it. Like, I do think it has become such a young league, and as we know, like, it's really hard to win and play consistent basketball, even when the guys have good numbers. But with such young talent, it's really hard to create that winning culture in a lot of places. So that's definitely part of it. I also think the change the league made with allowing more physicality, yes, it still needs to be called consistently, and that's still an issue. But the way that the league changed things after last year's debacle of an all-star game, I think it greatly improved the product. I think it's mostly held into the action this season. It's not quite as good as what we saw at the end of last season, but I do think that change after the all-star weekend has created a big sense of competition that's allowed now.
Do you think either, I'll just say all three. If we're continuing with this theme of, LeBron, Durant, Steph as the most marketable players and the biggest celebrities or whatever, superstars, according to Bob Myers in the league, do you think any of the three teams, Lakers, Warriors, Suns, has a legitimate chance to represent the West and maybe win a championship this year?
I don't see it with the Lakers. I do think they're not as bad as everyone says, but I don't think we've seen a championship level from them. I do think the Warriors can get there, but they need to find a little bit of help. But we've seen through flashes here and there, we've seen them look like, kind of that 2022 team that won it all. And then before KD got hurt this season, the Suns looked legit. Like I don't know if they can get back to that. I don't know if that was a little bit of a fluke early on in the season, but they're kind of borderline for me. I do think the Warriors at their best is better than any of those other teams at their best.
The deal with Phoenix, man, then this, Zach, like, tell me that they're fully healthy for 4 rounds and we can talk. I just don't think they're built.
Even one round.
Right.
Even
like,
one round,
yeah,
man.
I mean, do you really think they can stay healthy to make a long run? We haven't seen it.
No, I think, they haven't been together that long, but no, this team made the finals in 2021. They made big changes, which anybody would do, getting Durant. You can argue about the Bradley Beal deal and whether or not that was a good idea in this era. But no, like, that team is legitimate. That team has been good for a few years now. And, yeah, if they're healthy, like, sign me up. But why would we believe – like, they're kind of in that zone of, all right, I got to see it. I got to see you be healthy to believe it.
Yeah. All right, so back to yesterday, a couple of different things. When the 76ers are fully healthy, and back to the health thing, but when they have all their players and when they're playing, like, their best basketball, because there are moments yesterday, obviously it's the Celtics and everyone else in the East. Maybe the Cavs have something to say about it. What is what's the Zach Harper best case scenario for Philly this year if everything kind of falls into play?
Man, I don't know. Like, I think I don't see anything past the second round. Mm-hmm. I want to be optimistic. I have been more impressed with them over the last 11 games or so. They look better. It's been nothing dominant, but it's not incompetent, right? Which is what we saw in the first 19 games or whatever it was, 17 games. And so they're obviously much better when those three guys are healthy. We saw great stuff out of Caleb Martin yesterday, but I'm still wait and see with them. Like, I mean, how many times has Embiid had different things so far this season? How many times has Paul George had different things so far this season? Like, there's just no reason to believe in their health.
Who's the one Eastern Conference team that you think keeps Joe Mazzulla up at night?
Oh, that's a good question. It might be Cleveland. I still haven't completely bought in with Cleveland, but the size, the three-point shooting, the wrinkles to Kenny Atkinson's offense that he's implemented from what they were doing last year, there is something there. I don't know if it's enough to take down Boston, but there's a lot of talent on that Cleveland team. All
right, before I say you lose, contractually obligated to ask you a question about the Utah Jazz. So here's what we're going to do.
Well, how about this? I'm going to the game tonight.
Oh, you are?
Jazz Blazers. Yeah, I'm going. So ask me whatever you want.
You're from Sacramento. What's the Portland tie?
My parents live in Oregon, so we're all going up. Nieces and nephew, we're all going up and checking out the game.
Do they know anything about basketball, or do they ask you all the questions?
Oh no, they play basketball.
Oh,
My
cool.
nephew's
Okay.
obsessed with basketball. Yeah, no, they're into it.
All right. I guess what are you most excited about as the 7-21 Utah Jazz take on the 9-20 Blazers tonight?
That's a good question. I think I'm most excited to see if we can get a great offensive game. Like I don't like neither of these teams offensively are very good, but I do think Anthony Simons could go for 40, Lowry could go for 40. Like you could get a good game out of this. I just don't know that we should expect it, but I do think when you have two teams in this zone, there's a chance you get a good game.
And, I was actually talking about this earlier. We had Bowler on. He's calling the game tonight. And there are moments when the Jazz are fully healthy. First of all, when Markkanen's on the floor. And we've seen a couple of vintage Clarkson games. He's not that guy consistently anymore. But then Colin kind of gets going, and Keontae just doesn't screw it all up. And Walker is playing really well. There are still moments where I look at this team and I say they better not win 30 games and draft ninth, because there's actually some talent on the floor.
Yeah. Agreed. I think that's the game. I mean, look, it was one moment, but that game against Detroit, what was that, a week or two ago, whenever that was?
Last week,
that was a fun game. You had Keontae George with that big dunk on Jalen Duren. Like, stuff can happen in these Jazz games. They can be fun. They're not, but they can be.
Right. And hope this time of year is a good thing, Zach. So we'll end it there. Enjoy the game. Happy New Year, brother. Thanks for the time.
Appreciate it. Happy New Year. Thanks, Spence.
All right, we'll catch a quick break. Going to do a quick sports court with our friends from Handy and Handy. Then we'll get into the 5 o'clock hour, which will be college football. Jim Herman joins us. So a lot to do before we say goodnight at 6, and time for some Thursday night football right here on ESPN 700. It is Sports Court time. We do it every Thursday, right about now, with our good friends over at Handy and Handy. It is Christmas time, so Preston is playing Scrooge and Grinch somewhere, and dampening the Christmas spirit. So we want to keep things positive. We're bringing in the more positive of the duo. It's just me and Garrett today. Garrett, Handy, happy Christmas season. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, happy Christmas to you. How are you?
And Preston, if you're listening, we love you. I'm just teasing. I don't want to hurt our guys' feelings.
We do love Preston.
We do. All right, so we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to do like a little year in review of some of the biggest and best stories we've covered on throughout the course of this really fun segment that I look forward to every week with you guys over in Handy and Handy on Sports Court. So there's been very few editions of Sports Court without talking about the NCAA and how they are facing multiple antitrust lawsuits, how they're trying to traverse their way through the NIL. And the number one settlement that we've covered that really affects a lot of people that love college football and the sport, of course, is the House versus the NCAA. So let's kind of dig into these storylines regarding the NCAA and their antitrust lawsuits and what our listeners should know about where the NCAA finds themselves now.
Yeah, and you're right, Spence. I mean, that's definitely, I think the biggest story of the year is just week after week, it seems like the NCAA getting hit with some new lawsuit, and most of it revolving around NIL, right, and the rights of athletes versus the NCAA and their ability to participate. And so the big lawsuit, of course, was the House versus NCAA case. This case was filed. It was a class action lawsuit, and it covers any student athletes back to 2016. And so it's going to allow NIL money, allow them to be paid, and revenue sharing from broadcast rights. This was settled back in May for $2.75 billion. And it, I think we kind of saw this coming, and we've seen the trend for years now. There was the O'Bannon case and then the Alston decision. And so it seems like the House case is kind of the natural progression in this. But I mean, really, in 2024, it seems like the ground sort of shifted beneath us with this decision, I think.
I also want to touch on the NCAA transfer rules situation because it is such a hot button topic right now with the University of Utah essentially rebuilding their team from the ground up in 1 year. It's such a tough thing to do. So let's review that a little bit. And then I'm going to ask you from your vantage point with your legal expertise whether or not you think there will be more changes moving forward so they, don't have free agency while the season is still going.
Yeah, right. So, this started out at the beginning of 2024. There was a preliminary injunction was granted, and the Department of Justice joined this lawsuit as well. But it allowed players to transfer and play immediately, where you used to have to sit out a year or whatever, and athletes would think twice about, well, do I really want to transfer? But now it's, hey, transfer and play, right? We've got the transfer portal and twice a year, and so it's been felt like kind of a moving target. And, I think another issue to kind of talk about and think about is really, does a college degree really, how's that going to look? Does that matter, right? This is changing so much. And then especially, the other one I was going to touch on with this, Spence, is this, Diego Pavia rule that just came out. And we just talked about this a couple weeks ago on Sports Court, but now you're not counting junior college, those years that you played towards your eligibility. And again, the idea is, hey, there's more years you can play, more years to earn NIL money. And so, it's really changing the landscape of college sports.
Any thought on what they may look to do? And we can move off if you don't have a take on it. But I'm just curious from your vantage point, if you think they're going to actually try to corral this thing a little bit, because it's not sustainable, Garrett, not as of now. Do you think they're going to try to do something different between now and the next college football season?
No, I agree with you. I don't think it's sustainable. Something's going to have to change. And we've talked about it before on Sports Court. There's been discussion about like federal legislation, or does each state try to tackle this? But there's it's an arms race, right, between all the universities that, and the states are included in that. They want their schools and their states to be competitive. And so nobody's really willing to tamp down on this quite yet. I think it's going to have to be a federal response, and with how slow our federal government moves to get anything done, I don't see anything happening for a while. I kind of think 2025 is going to be a little more of the same, where we're just figuring this out as we go.
In addition to constant stories about the NCAA being, labeled as, serial antitrust violators and having to go to this court and that court, a lot of coaches brought lawsuits against their former employers throughout the course of the season. So let's start with a review of Blake Anderson. It's a local angle, who, of course, was up at Utah State and then let go along with some other folks up there. And Bronco Mendenhall hired to kind of recapture the Utah State days of old like he did at BYU. But as you look back on the Blake Anderson Utah State situation, Garrett, what comes to mind?
Well, for sure. I think this was a really big story locally for us. I mean, he just filed it, and it was finally filed in November, but a $15 million lawsuit against Utah State, and he also named, I think, the athletic director and a few other people. But, of course, he was fired for cause over some employee reporting requirements. I mean, that's kind of the technicality, right, of how a situation was handled. And whether or not he reported that correctly. And so there's been, of course, a ton of fallout. We've talked about it a lot on Sports Court over the last many months, but that case really is kind of just getting going with the lawsuit having been filed, I think, just about a month ago. And so we'll see. But, I mean, it's, Utah State, and, and I was going to talk about this a little bit later, too, but they're involved in several legal issues that we've talked about. I mean, they're looking at some potentially big money, big fees, whether you're paying Blake Anderson or you're paying the Mountain West exit fees. But being fired for cause, and getting out of that contract, I think anytime we see that where a coach is fired for cause, I think you can expect that there's going to be a lawsuit.
I also wanted to revisit the John Gruden situation because he's now Barstool Sports' newest employee, and he continues to be in the news. And, once upon a time, John Gruden was thought to be like a Wonderkins head coach and then a Wonderkins broadcaster. Didn't take a lot of time to settle in as a great voice on Monday Night Football, gets back in the league, and everything goes south. So let's review the John Gruden stuff before we move on to the other stories.
Yeah, and John Gruden, just like Mel Tucker and Brian Flores, I mean, you've got these NFL coaches with lawsuits, but Gruden in particular, these cases are just they're going on forever, right? And his firing was over these old emails that were leaked to the media, and he felt that those, his allegation has been that the NFL used these emails and that Roger Goodell did to kind of weaponize those to pressure the Raiders to fire him. And so there's been this whole dispute. Of course, anytime we're talking about an NFL coach being fired, there's this issue of arbitration, right? And how is the case going to get handled? Is Roger Goodell going to be the one to decide, right? He ends up being judge, jury, and executioner. And so right now, his case, I think the latest on it, it's headed to the Nevada Supreme Court. They're going to review that issue. So, again, still going on, but it's provided a lot of stuff to talk about for sure.
All right, you referenced Utah State. They're among the topics in our next kind of little silo, which is conference realignment lawsuits. Also seem to be a very consistent theme. FSU Clemson against the ACC, the Mountain West against the Pac-12 for poaching schools, then Utah State against the Mountain West for exit fees. Another kind of gift that kept on giving for content for this segment. But as you look back on and they're also continuing, the latest on the conference realignment lawsuits.
Yeah, no, they are. So, I mean, I think the trend is whether it's a school or a player, right? They're looking for, hey, where can I get the best deal, right? Whether it's at a certain school or for these schools, what conference can it be in? And so, Utah State, of course, I mean, bolting for the Pac-12 and the, Mountain West, and there's these exit fees. And, so there's been lawsuits back and forth, right, between the Mountain West and the Pac-12. And again, Utah State's gotten in on that. To kind of go on the offensive a little bit. I think what's difficult for these schools is these are large, sophisticated institutions that got into these agreements with these conferences knowing what they're doing. And we don't have to go into it a lot, but I mean, that's the same thing with Florida State and Clemson trying to get out of the ACC, right? That's the argument is these guys know what they're doing, what they're getting into. They benefit from these conference relationships and the revenue sharing with broadcast deals. But as soon as there's a better deal to come along, they want out. They want out of the contract. And so I think these cases are going to go on for a long time as well. I mean, there's just a lot of money at stake. These penalties are pretty huge. I mean, luckily, Utah State's not looking at anything as steep as what, Florida State and Clemson, they have a $140 million withdrawal penalty from the ACC that they're fighting.
Jeez. All right, over to actual NIL lawsuits. And once that door was open, I figured, thousands of players would walk through it. And, of course, time will tell if other players add themselves to this list. But former players include the 83 Wolfpack team. Shout out Thurl Bailey, national champs under Jim Valvano. Denard Robinson, Braylon Edwards, who were really good for Michigan. And then Terrell Pryor, Ohio State. That's kind of the headline names. Some others will follow suit. Then there are the current situations as well. But let's start with the former players who've elected to try their hand with the NIL lawsuits.
Right. So again, the House settlement really just covers back to 2016. So you've got these former players saying, "Hey, well, wait a minute. My school or my conference, for years has been profiting off of my name, image, and likeness." And so, you brought up the 83 Wolfpack team, and that's true, right? I mean, whether every time you turn on March Madness, you're going to see the highlight of that famous team and their Cinderella run. And so, you've got these former players, they're saying, "Hey, well, wait a minute, I should have been entitled to something," and looking for their piece. I mean, I think it's really interesting. Like you said, the floodgates are open. We've just seen kind of these big names filing lawsuits, but it'll be interesting to see what kind of precedent gets set as those cases get resolved in one way or another.
The current player situation is also fascinating because, again, we're so early in our understanding of what this landscape is. Precedents will be set and others will follow suit. That's how it works. So it's Jaden Rashada who's suing Florida over a $14 million NIL deal. Then the situation with Matt Sluka, the UNLV quarterback who just left the team. Get it in writing. Always get it in writing. But do you think this is the beginning of a trend? Is this an early precedent that you think a lot of players are going to follow suit with?
I think it is the beginning of a trend. I mean, and like you said, what we'll probably see is just there needs to be some more sophistication from the players and the schools in negotiating the terms of these NIL deals, right? I mean, it's in writing, right? You've got these recruiters from different schools going out and making big promises to players, whether it's money and, A, do they have the authority to do that, and B, is it going to be binding? And so I think we'll have to see schools, can start kind of putting together their own policies and procedures on how they want to do this, but they got to be careful because, these are agreements being made, and even if it's not in writing, right, there can still be an oral contract. And so, I think we're going to continue to see these things where, there's just a lot of money at stake. So it's going to end up in lawsuits.
The final little silo we're going to attack, and I don't mean to laugh because legal problems are no laughing matter, but I'm just remembering waking up to a text like, "Hey, did you hear Scotty Scheffler got arrested trying to go into the tournament?" I was like, no, he didn't. He is a choir boy. Scotty Scheffler did not get arrested. And then the Tyreek Hill situation, a bad look. And, of course, Shohei Ohtani, whose translator was found guilty and is going to go to jail for a long, long time. So let's hit on these individual legal issues, some a little bit comic and others pretty sad.
Yeah, but I thought these were kind of the big ones from the year. I mean, the Scheffler and Tyreek Hill, it is kind of funny, right? You've got these two high-profile professional athletes on either, Tyreek's on his way to the Dolphin Stadium and Scheffler's on the way to the PGA Championship. And they're both getting pulled over. What kind of start out as kind of traffic violations. Scotty Scheffler, if you remember that video, and the allegation that, it was a felony and 3 misdemeanors for assaulting a police officer with his vehicle. And, he was a choir boy, I guess. The charges got dropped pretty quickly for him. And then we had the Tyreek Hill video, right? That was pretty wild as well. So anyway, just this issue, right, of these athletes and whether they think, in those moments, hey, these traffic rules may not apply to me. I'm important and I'm on my way to, people want to see me. The Ohtani case, again, I kind of included this one, Spence, just because I think this issue, which might be something we talk about more in 2025, but is the issue of sports betting, right? And of course, Ohtani, this is a case where his interpreter pled guilty to bank fraud and taking $17 million from Ohtani. And, we could speculate forever about whether or not Ohtani knew about that or, was a part of that, or whether the interpreter just took the fall for it. But we have had a few cases we've talked about on sports courts where, players are betting, right? It's easy to do. and I think we'll see more scandals regarding sports betting in the year to come.
All right, Garrett, before I set you loose, for any of our listeners who have legal questions, how can they get a hold of you over at Handy and Handy?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about any legal questions you have, especially in the area of personal injury, which is what we do. But you can reach us at 801-264-6677 or go to our website, handylawyutah.com.
Thank you, my friend. Hope you had a great holiday, and we will catch up next week.
Thanks. You too, Spence. See you.
All right, Garrett Handy. Get a hold of them if you have any legal questions. Really good people that are willing to help. We'll catch a quick break. Drive at 5 comes your way coming up next. Then Jim Herman, college football, the rest of the hour. And then we'll turn it over to Thursday Night Football in the pros. Little Bears, Seahawks, and you can listen to it right here on ESPN 700. All right, we were talking earlier about the potential of we had Eric Weddle on the show. Fun conversation with Eric. We were talking about the quality of the NFL games juxtaposed to the NBA action we saw yesterday. NBA had a good day. NFL, the two games were a blowout. However, we have the data now. The doubleheader on Netflix resulted in the two most streamed games in NFL history. The Ravens and the Texans peaked at 24.3 mil, and the Chiefs and the Steelers 24.1, but the stream peaked at 27 million people during Beyonce's halftime show. That further underscores my point that the NFL has done such a phenomenal job at creating a television product that is far superior to any other league. Even if you're not a football fan, even if you're not necessarily a huge NFL fan, people are going to tune in. Like your relatives want to watch it. Maybe your sister wants to watch Beyonce or whatever it is. Like their television product with their primetime marquee events really dwarfs anything that any other league does. And now we have the data. I have not seen how many people watched the NBA games yesterday. My guess is it's going to be a healthy number, but not close to what has turned out to be 27 million. That's your peak when Beyonce was performing at halftime. So that is pretty wild. The Christmas Day games for the NBA, this is just spilling in now. Most watched Christmas days in 5 years, with viewership up 84% last year across ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, and Disney+. So the Christmas Day games averaged 7.7 million and peaked with 8.32 million when the Warriors and the Lakers were playing. So that's a good day for the NBA. But a good day for the NBA is essentially 1/3 of what it is for the NFL, and it was two games that were blowouts. I mean, how many of you watched all the NFL games? Unless you had some side situations manifesting themselves, my guess is you turn them off. All right, Jim Herman's going to join us coming up next. We're going to do some college football. I want to tell you about my friends at Prize Picks. It is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and more than or billions of dollars, I should say, of awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. It's very easy. Use an example for tonight's Jazz game. All you do is pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. So Larry Markkinen, more or less than 19.5 points. Walker Kessler, more or less than 2.5 blocks. Things like that. Scoot Henderson, more or less than 7.5 assists, or whatever it is. You get the idea. It's very, very easy. And right now they're giving away free money. My suggestion to you is go grab the free money and then try it and see if you like it. And you do that by downloading the Prize Picks app today and using the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700 to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. Jim Herman is our guest coming up next right here on ESPN 700. All right, wrapping up the show on a Thursday afternoon. Hopefully you guys had a fantastic Christmas. And we'll wish you a happy holiday season, happy New Year's as well, although we'll be back on air tomorrow and back on air next week. Tomorrow we're going to be out and about, Tim Dahle Nissan on remote, so come by and say hello. But hopefully you had a great holiday. Spent some time with friends and family, ate some good food, took some time off work, all that good stuff. It's a busy night tonight, busy sports night tonight. We've got a little NBA action where the Jazz are taking on the Blazers. Blazers is a 2.5-point favorite in that game. On this radio station, you'll hear the final NFL game of the Week 17 slate. Cannot believe that we're here. But, yes, it is the Seahawks and it is the Bears. Live from Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois. Right now, Seattle's a 4.5-point favorite. The over-under is 42.5. Some bowl action, too, in college football. Of course, a lot of attention around here on the Alamo Bowl coming up on Saturday. That is BYU and Colorado. BYU a slight underdog. Colorado a 4-point favorite. In that one, we got a little Rutgers K-State. If you want to watch a little Big 12 football, that's going on right now. Arkansas State Bowling Green. That is the Hancock Whitney Stadium in Mobile, Alabama for the 68 Ventures Bowl. And then earlier today, the Game Above Sports Bowl saw Toledo beat Pitt in 6 overtimes. So you got a little college football action tonight, a little NBA action tonight. And so hopefully you enjoy your Thursday. And we have a very fun, jam-packed Friday show for you guys. So make sure to join us for that. I want to say a very special thank you today to Jim Herman, Craig Bowler, Jack Gordon, Monson, Eric Weddle, and Zach Harper. Very busy show. A lot of college football, some NFL, of course, some NBA, and some Utah Jazz. If you miss any of the sound from the show today, you can head on over to the website, which is ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app. You can take our station on the go. It's how I listen to our station. It's the ESPN 700 app, and that's available in the App Store or the Google Play Store. And then finally, for what we do in our space, afternoon drive, 4 hours every day. Check out our podcast page. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts, and that's available wherever you get your shows. Please subscribe, rate, review, say nice things in the comments, give us all the stars. It actually does help. For Olivia, who's filling in for Porter, she'll be back on the 1s and 2s tomorrow. My name is Spence Checketts, saying goodnight. Thursday night football, NFL style, comes your way coming up next. We'll talk to you tomorrow right here on ESPN 700.